Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And no, you're not dreaming. We really are heading back to the ballot box. Do you know, I think I've spent more time in a polling booth over the last couple of years than I've seen my own sister, and she only lives in Kidderminster. We will be discussing all manner of ramifications, all manner of predictions, all manner of responses. But, you know, I've got this sort of weird habit at 10 o'clock in the morning of trying to find things we can all agree on. Conservatives are going to win. We can all agree on that, right? Can't we? By how much? Probably can't agree on that. What would failure look like for Theresa May? You find yourself in this weird position where some people are already suggesting that a majority in the region of 50 to 60 seats would actually constitute relative failure, given the clear path that she has in front of her, given the open goal that she effectively sees before her. But let's begin with the why and then moves on to the whats and possibly even the wherefores. Why now? Just your thoughts on that. Actually, I've read a lot of expert opinion. I've got some inexpert opinion of my own. There is some agreeable conflict, some agreeable contradiction between various schools of thought on this. She pledged time and time and time again that she wouldn't do it. The Fixed Term Parliament Act, although something of a fudge designed to camouflage coalition frailties, was effectively put in place to stop prime ministers from calling elections when the opinion polls favoured them. There's something worth dwelling on there, isn't there? The idea, and it was ever thus until 2010. It was ever thus, so you can't really look back and say that she's done something bad or wrong, because until 2010 it was what pretty much every prime minister in history had done. Do you know it's the same with the debates? I don't know where the idea came from that these debates were somehow cast in stone. William Hague begged to debate Tony Blair when he was leader of the opposition. I imagine Theresa May, who was in that shadow cabinet, I think, was probably on the side of the beggars, was probably saying, yes, absolutely, Tony Blair should debate William Hague. Hague was perceived as a brilliant debater, and therefore someone who might draw blood in the event of a televised encounter with Tony Blair, which is partly why Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell decided not to go near him on the telly. The debates only became part of the political furniture 7 years ago, so Theresa May hasn't really subverted democracy or ducked any particular responsibility by declining to do it now. There's probably part of you, as there is with me, that wonders what on earth it is she's got to fear from a televised debate with Jeremy Corbyn, but we'll tune into PMQs at 12 o'clock today and find out whether or not we can put some flesh on the bones of that question. So, I mean, the thing that intrigues me most is who she's trying to head off at the pass by doing this. It's probable that the economic picture is going to deteriorate markedly in the next few years. I mean, the recession is cyclical anyway, so it might have happened even without Brexit. All of this talk about economic indicators and unemployment in the context of the referendum is, as you know, ridiculous, because we haven't actually left yet, and until we know the terms of the deal, all of the economic forecasts, all of the economic predictions are going to err on the side of pessimistic. Once you know what the deal is, the Daily Mail and it would seem the Prime Minister now have joined forces to say, even if you think it's awful, you're not allowed to criticise it. That first line of the speech yesterday about the Labour Party, who have made it their policy to support Brexit, but also want to have a vote on the terms of that withdrawal. That first line of the speech that appeared to say opposition is against the national interest. Political opposition is against the national interest. I've mellowed a bit since yesterday on that. It's not quite as toxic as I first thought it was, because you have to start seeing Brexit in a non-partisan way. It's not party political. It's got support, of course, on both sides of the House. It's got very little support on either side of the House historically, but as people are very fond of saying at the moment, we are where we are. And where we are is heading for the exit. It's just a question of which exit we're going to go through. And the suggestion that we're going to go through the worst available exit is, well, something surely that you feel qualified to question. It's reasonable to say, is that really a good idea? Except it's not. And the best proof of this attempt to close down debate is provided by the man who actually runs the country at the moment, the editor of the Daily Mail, Paul Dacre. The front page, I think it's going to go up there with enemies of the people, isn't it? First of all, they've chosen a picture of her, which is unflattering, I think it's fair to say, and a lot of thought goes into this. The editor of the Daily Mail sits, hawk-like over the shoulders of his sub-editors. This will have his fingerprints all over it. That selection of that photograph, it's slightly strange. It's slightly unnerving. It's got a touch of a Doctor Who villain to it, perhaps. But this phrase here, "crush the saboteurs," every time you think things might calm down, along comes the Daily Mail to absolutely reignite the flames of fury and unrighteous indignation. Crush the saboteurs? What does that even mean? Do you know what that means? I would have thought that if there are some people out there displaying a sincere skepticism about some of the stuff going on in the world of politics at the moment, then the way to calm their misgivings, the way to address their fears, is to calmly and with evidence explain why their misgivings are misplaced. Crush the saboteurs seems to me to be the polar opposite of democracy. Crush the saboteurs. Who are the saboteurs? What is a saboteur? Someone who seeks to damage something that's running well. How can you sabotage something that isn't even running at all? How can you sabotage something without knowing what it is? To say, I might reserve my judgment. I might reserve my judgment on whether this is good or bad for the country until I know what it's actually going to look like. That is now sabotage. Just pause and think about that for a moment. So let's not even be pro or remain at the moment. Let's pretend that we're cleverer than that as a country and say, do you know what? I followed the referendum. I followed the fallout. I followed the increasingly toxic aftermath. I laugh at attempts to claim that the country is coming together. I pray, I actually do pray, but I also wish that it comes together soon. This atmosphere of hatred and anger and utterly unfounded fury is poisonous to the interests of decent people. The story today that we should be talking about is back in the news again. There's 16 million people who have less than £100 in a savings account. 16 million of our neighbours and friends and family have less than £100 in a savings account. That means that personal economic Armageddon is a broken boiler away. Not even a broken boiler away. It's a lost phone away. Absolute economic, 16 million, but we're not talking about that, no. But let's pretend that we're clever enough to say that it's too soon to know whether Brexit will be good or bad. Let's pretend we're not falling into the trap of people on one side saying it's bound to be bad and people on the other saying, oh, it's going to be brilliant. Let's just pretend that we have got the intelligence to suggest that you wait until you know what's on offer before deciding whether it's a good offer or not. God, has it really come to this? How many years have we spent together now? 11 minutes after 10 on a Wednesday morning, and I'm having to say to you, can we pretend? Can we actually pretend that we're going to wait until we know what something is before we decide what our opinion of it is? Because this is where Brexit has gone now, isn't it? Nobody knows what it's actually going to look like. Most of the indications are that we're not going to come out of it with an arrangement or a deal that is better than the countries that remain in the European Union. That doesn't make me a saboteur or a traitor. It makes me someone who can count. That's all. It's unlikely that the European Union, who now do hold all the aces, are going to give us a deal that's better than the one that they have, isn't it? Which means that we have to find things that will make them wish that they'd left too. So we have to sail off around the world in search of deals and arrangements and trading partnerships that will be the envy of the European Union. And I can see how that might work. You can see how some optimists might be nailing their colours to that mast. But until we know what the actual deal is, how can anybody say whether it's good or bad? And the suggestion that you should wait to see what it is before deciding whether you want it is apparently treasonous. The work of a saboteur who must be crushed. Desperately trying to find common ground that everybody can agree on. And I can't. I'm not going to stop trying as long as they keep paying me. But isn't that the strangest thing you've ever heard? That we're unable to acknowledge as a country that you can't know whether something is good or bad until you know what that something is. This is what happens when demagogues take over and propaganda overtakes news. This is what happens when sound bites and scaremongering replace boring, statistical, evidence-based, factual reporting. You end up responding emotionally instead of intellectually. You can't respond intellectually to our Brexit deal? You can't, can you? Because you don't know what it is. So what does crush the saboteurs really mean? That is saying respond emotionally now and respond with hatred and with anger to a deal that doesn't yet exist and which nobody knows what it's going to look like. I heard John McDonnell this morning, the Shadow Chancellor, claim that this election isn't about Brexit. And I mean, if my heart could have sunk any lower, it would have done. It's been bopping around the bottom of my ribcage for some months now. So there was no prospect of it actually registering lower on that scale, on that graph. But this election is about nothing but Brexit. Of course it isn't. The domestic agenda is meaningless. The policies that she will bring in after being elected remain to be defined. The debate, the argument, everything's going to be about Brexit. And do you know what? I'm going to level with you now. There's a part of me that still doesn't understand why. How can anybody... So if you want to cast me as a Remainer, okay, or a Remona, or whatever the word is, how can anybody be angry with me for saying, surely we need to know what the deal is before we can decide definitively whether we like it or not? Actually, let's do that as the first question. 0345 6060973. Well, why is it even controversial? How? Is this too me? Is this too in? Am I asking you to provide me with some form of political therapy? But how do you think we've ended up in a place where it is controversial, even, let alone treasonous or sabotage, controversial to suggest that you don't know whether something is good or bad until you know what that something is? I understand some of the sort of nativist emotional Brexit support. Doesn't matter, doesn't care. The statistical, the intellectual concerns do not matter because these words, these powerful but essentially hollow words like control have assumed an epic significance, but that's emotional as well. So in an intellectual universe, in a rational world where we look at evidence before arriving at a conclusion or before forming an opinion, and we're free to form different opinions, but how can you form any opinion at all if you don't know what it is that you're discussing? Yeah, sorry, I wasn't expecting to go off in this particular direction. I was going to ask you a rather more straightforward question, but the more I think about it, the more important this becomes. So call me up, talk to me about Corbyn, talk to me about Theresa May, talk to me about the future, talk to me about the past, talk to me about Brexit. But talk to me, if you would, first and foremost, about why you think, whatever your loyalties are on this, why you think we've ended up in a place where suggesting that you should wait to see a deal before deciding whether a deal is good or bad has become such a toxic and controversial position to adopt. Use me as the whipping boy on this. I'm saying to you now, I don't know quite how they're going to pull anything out of the bag that will look better than what we've currently got. But my God, I hope they do. I've got children. Generations who are going to have to live with these decisions. So my God, I hope they pull it out of the bag. But I can't sit here now and say I'm glad that this is going to happen because I don't know what is going to happen. How can anybody be happy about what we're doing? You can be hopeful or ambivalent, optimistic or pessimistic, but how can anyone actually be happy about a leap into the unknown? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Is that question going to work? Well, it's up to you, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. But I look at the front of the Mail, I know that sets the tone of the national conversation, even though it's shed 1 million readers, since Paul Dacre became editor of that newspaper, but it's still very much setting the agenda. And I don't quite get it. To say to you, imagine if you were buying a car and I asked you to decide whether to buy it or not without looking under the bonnet, without taking it for a test drive, without seeing the logbook, without knowing what the mileage was. And if you said, I'm not sure I want to buy that car until I've actually looked under the bonnet and checked the mileage and read the logbook, and I called you a saboteur or a traitor. Have I got that right? Is that where we are? Or am I being a little bit pessimistic myself? It's 10:17.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
22 minutes after 10 is the time, and you're welcome to try and blow the wheels off, but I think that car analogy has provided a lot of comfort to me and maybe also to you, trying to understand what it is that you find so confusing about politics at the moment. And largely it's the cheerfulness and excitement about people of any political persuasion who think that they can see into the future. And what we're doing effectively is buying a car without knowing the mileage, the contents of the logbook, the state of the engine. In fact, we don't know anything about that car. All we know is its name. It's called Brexit, the Brexit-mobile. How can you be excited about buying that car when you know nothing about it? And how can it be treasonous or sabotage to simply suggest that we should take it for a test drive or at least have a look around the showroom before deciding whether we want it or not? How has it come to this, is my question for you. First up, I don't know what else we'll discuss today, but it'll all be linked to this. Jacob is in Louth. Jacob, you can kick us off. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I love your analogy on cars, James. Exactly the point, really.
I think it is, isn't it? I think it is. And if people don't like it, they can ring me up and tell me why. But it just seems to me to be self-evident that we're buying something without knowing what it is. So caution and scepticism should be welcome.
The point is, you've got the facts in front of you to make a decision. You've got a fact sheet, you've got a specification,
yes,
and you can choose whether you like the car or not.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we're on the flip side of that, whereby no governing body has the full expertise, no one has the actual facts, so it's what ifs and wherefores. It's all opinion based, and unfortunately, no one's given us that from the start. So what happens? Human nature fills that void with emotion, with impulse. We shoot from the hip. Everyone wants an opinion through the media or what have you to influence individuals' decisions. It's almost like, rather than having a car, it's like designing a car from scratch and you don't really know what it's going to do.
And why, I mean, let's talk about the Daily Mail briefly. Why, and we're talking now about one man. They've already had one pop at me, so I guess sort of I just have to strap on my armour and get ready for the next ones. But you're talking about one man who's absolutely adamant that anyone who questions the wisdom of buying this car without knowing if it's even got an engine is a traitor. I mean, the phrase on the front today is "crush the saboteurs." When that man killed Joe Cox, he gave his name in court as "death to traitors." They're from the same lexicon, aren't they? They're from the same little book of slogans. Death to traitors, crush the saboteurs. One MP's already dead because of this kind of rhetoric. Why does anybody, and we'll start with Paul Dacre, want the country to buy a car so badly and so desperately that he doesn't even want them to look under the bonnet, and he wants to shoot down in flames anybody who dares to suggest that we might take it for a test drive first? Why do you think that is?
Well, they're almost trying to sort of say, aren't they, that, you know, this is the way we're going. You want to try and steer us off that path and not get behind this, then... But I
can't even let you use the word path in this context, can I? Because, you know, I know where a path leads. I can look at a map, I know where a path leads. There is no path here.
That's the point, but that's it. That it's all being done on feeling. They're feeling their way through it, and they're making decisions, you know, in short term.
And what is the feeling? What is the feeling that people like you and I don't quite share or can't get our head around? I understand a kind of nativism. I understand the sense that because I am British, I am better than that French person over there. I don't share it, but I understand it. I understand the post-war hangover of thinking that if, you know, your father had died or your grandfather had died in the Second World War, you might struggle with a sense of European unity, particularly with Germany often perceived as being in the box seat, and that might be problematical as well. But I can assuage all of those fears, all of those borderline phobias by looking at peace and security and status quo, can't I?
Yeah, I mean, but isn't the point that everyone is so confused about it, still is confused?
But they keep telling me they're not confused. That's the thing I find so genuinely fascinating. I just wish I was doing it in a classroom rather than having to live it.
It's like anything in politics or what have you, though. You've got to have a strong stance on it, don't you? Otherwise you seem weak, and then it's even worse. So you can't... It's almost like they've not got a choice. They have to remain strong. They have to remain, or seem to remain, to have a strong head, because if they do anything but that, then it's just going to have more of an adverse effect.
And it involves admitting... either at best you made a mistake, at worst you deliberately and cynically misled your readers or your voters or the people.
And you can't do that. So you can't do that. So it's almost like it's a one-track path that they're down. It's almost like we're down this path now, so let's not look at the past. Let's look at the future. And that's almost what they're trying to say with the saboteurs. You know, you guys, you know, we are down this one-track path, whether you like it or not now.
Yeah,
and if you're gonna
you shut up and deal with it. Close your eyes, put your fingers in the air and get with the programme now, or else.
Exactly.
Death to traitors.
And unfortunately, that's the position we're in now.
It is, isn't it? You think it is. I think it is at the moment. As ever on the programme, I'm open to persuasion from another caller. Listen, if you're still a passionate leaver, I'm not going to make you explain why today. I'm not going to make you name the laws that you won't have to obey anymore. I'm not going to unveil the sand upon which you've built your convictions, because they're probably not built upon intellectual or political convictions. They're built upon, as Jacob has suggested, emotional foundations. So just talk to me about the car, though. If you are still absolutely convinced this is the best car you've ever seen, even though you haven't seen it. I'm almost stitching you up before you ring in when I do that. But then, okay, you stitch me up. Explain why the analogy is bogus. You don't know what's under the bonnet. You don't know what's in the logbook. You don't know what the mileage is. You don't know who the previous owners are. You don't even know whether this car is a cut and shut job, whether it used to be two cars. It's been slammed in half and welded back together again. You know absolutely nothing about this car. But if you say, maybe I don't want to buy it, you're a traitor. And death to traitors, or today's version of death to traitors, crush the saboteurs. And remember, the Prime Minister said yesterday that the country is coming together. The country is coming together. It's coming up to 29 minutes after 10. I'm going to let callers have a little on. The switchboards are full, so I'm sorry if you can't get through. But I spoke to Jacob for a long time, because we're not going to move on to a new subject at 11 o'clock. We're not going to suddenly start talking about parking tickets or foreign aid. We're going to talk exclusively about the domestic political landscape, which is defined almost exclusively by Brexit and the looming election, which makes this newfound analogy of the car all the more attractive. You haven't seen the logbook, you don't know what the mileage is, you can't look under the bonnet, you don't know who the previous owners are, you know absolutely nothing about this car except its name. It's called Brexit. How have you been persuaded that it's so shiny, this Brexit car, so shiny, 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 that you don't need to know whether it's got an engine, you don't need to know whether it's got a catalytic converter, you don't even need to know how many wheels it's got, because it's so damn shiny, you just love it, okay? 0345 6060 973. And I'm sorry if you don't like the word shiny, but it's the best I've got. That's all you get from the usual suspects, from the cheerleaders and the demagogues. They just keep telling you how shiny it is. You know, it's so shiny, blue passports. It's so shiny, we've got our country back. It's so shiny, Parliament is sovereign again. It's just shininess. None of that means anything. It's just shine. Or a word that sounds very similar to it. All their ferocity was turned outwards against enemies of the state, foreigners, traitors, saboteurs, thought criminals. That's not today's Daily Mail editorial. That's from 1984. By George Orwell, published, ironically enough, on June the 8th, 1949. June the 8th, 2017, will perhaps see a step closer to that dystopic future. I think we all hope not. Nick Clegg joins me on the line now, the former Liberal Democrat leader, of course, former Deputy Prime Minister, has announced this morning that he will stand in that looming election. We'll begin, I think, Nick, by asking you why you think Theresa May has called it.
Oh, I think she's given lots of highfalutin, high-minded reasons, hasn't she? Talking, you know, in lots of platitudes about national unity, but actually there's a pretty grubby political calculation behind it, which is that, you know, her principal opponent, Jeremy Corbyn, is widely considered to be a pretty hapless leader.
Do you consider him to be that?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, you know, I not always, but I generally try and kind of refrain from making these things personal. But sure. I do think, you know, and I certainly notice in I'm talking to you from Sheffield, I notice here that even traditional Labour supporters just feel that he's just not really cutting it. And I think what's also, I think, disappointed a lot of Labour supporters is they feel that the Labour Party have just given up the ghost completely on this all-important issue of Brexit. You know, they voted along with the government and with, you know, real hardliners like Michael Gove and John Redwood and others on triggering Article 50 when they didn't need to, and now, you know, they're talking about, I think it was Emily Thornberry who said last night extraordinarily, said we're not going to take a side on this issue. Well, I'm afraid it's one of those issues where you have to take a side, and indeed taking a side is what will be very much the dominant theme of this general election. Do you believe that the kind of very uncompromising, unflinching, hard Brexit that Theresa May wants, and she of course wants to secure a landslide majority on June the 8th to in effect do what she likes, to get a blank check to basically...
Yes, but where do you derive your confidence that she actively wants this sort of hard Brexit, this jump without a parachute?
Sure.
Because there is a school of thought this morning that suggests that this stymies the hard rump of her party just as much as it potentially stymies people who want to reverse the referendum result?
Sure. I'd make a distinction. I'd make a distinction between what I call the kind of, the sort of the steps to the final destination. And I think on that, she will now have a bit more time. She probably will be able to negotiate a longer transition period. Even if she wants to, I guess she could even try and ask the 27 other EU member states to extend the 2-year deadline. So I think how you get to the final destination, yes, I think it is fair to say that she has more wriggle room. I think the final destination, however, remains, in my view, as unnecessarily self-harming as ever, because she's not resiling from her uncompromising stance that says not only are we leaving the political institutions of the EU, we're also leaving Margaret Thatcher's single market, we're also leaving the customs union, we're not going to abide by any rulings of the European Court of Justice, and so on. And it's very important to remember what that means. That means that we will, however long it takes, at the end of this process, be at a greater distance from our largest export markets than countries like Turkey, Norway, Iceland, who are all either members of the customs union or members of the single market, even though they're not members of the EU. So I think the journey might be a little bit more, how can I put it, sensible or moderate. The destination, in my view, remains as immoderate and irresponsible as before.
So have you not personally, and I suppose politically, accepted that we are leaving the single market, call it Margaret Thatcher's if you will, we are leaving the customs union, we are leaving the European Union? Are you still clinging to some hope that the result might be reversed?
I'm clinging to two things. I think, firstly, I think the more that Theresa May will look at this and the more complex these negotiations will begin. And remember, the other reason why she's triggering this general election now is not just to exploit the opportunity of the problems in the Labour Party. It's also because she knows all the bad news is still to come, both in terms of the Brexit negotiations, the effect on the economy. So she's getting her election and her excuses in early.
And the amount of time for recovery thus extends, of course, to 2022 instead of 2020.
Yeah, exactly. But in answer to your question, I do think the more that British negotiators look at this, and the more disruptive this very hard Brexit will become for the British economy, and it will catch up with us at some point. I know there's an endless debate about, why did it not hit the British economy earlier? Well, simple reason for that is nothing's happened yet. I think when the reality of this very uncompromising hard Brexit dawns on people, it will have a material effect on the British economy. It already is, by the way, on our prices and our living standards and so on. I think when that becomes, I think the opportunity does still present itself for the government to say, actually, we're gonna sue for peace, if I can put it like that. We're going to go for a Norwegian-style accommodation where, yes, we leave the European Union, and to that extent, they will be fulfilling the mandate from the referendum, but they're going to do it in a much less economically disruptive way. I think that is still possible, and of course, I believe, assuming there is a deal at the end of the day, I do think people should have a right to have a say on that deal. I don't see why it should just be one person who's sort of regally appointed in number 10 to decide all these matters for us for the next half a decade, no questions asked. I mean, Parliament might frankly well just sort of pack up and go home for the next half a decade if we pursue, or if we follow Theresa May's logic. She seems to think, supported, as I think you implied earlier, by the kind of splenetic headlines of the Daily Mail and elsewhere, that anyone who questions anything that she says is, somehow it's verboten. It's not allowed. It should be abolished.
And simultaneously, of course, she claims that the country is coming together. Is that the impression you get in Sheffield Hallam?
No. I don't think the country's been more polarised and divided than it has before. I mean, some of the divisions are, very familiar, obviously, between Scotland and England, between London and other parts of England, between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and so on. The one that worries me most, and I think is the most persistent, is the generational one. I think it is. I find this over and over again, and as someone who clearly, I blotted my copybook, to put it mildly, with a lot of younger voters, because some of the things we did in coalition. But I now spend a lot of time talking in sixth form colleges and schools and universities, and there is an undimmed anger and frustration amongst so many young people I meet that they are having a future imposed upon them that they explicitly voted against. I mean, it's an astonishing thing for a mature democracy to do that, to basically say to the 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds who voted for Remain, I'm sorry, we, even though we're not going to have to live with the consequences and you will have to, are going to impose a future that you don't want. And I think that will, one way or another, that will come out in the wash in British politics in the years to come.
And yet, their only alternative, their only option, presumably you would argue, is to vote for your party. Most optimistic projections at the moment are looking barely into double figures on seats. So is it a meaningful vote, a vote for the Liberal Democrats, as simply as a way of casting a protest against the Brexit programme?
Well, it depends what you think the function of opposition is. Do you think opposition politics is an important role? And I so happen to think. I mean, look, I'll be blunt with you. I certainly don't anticipate Jeremy Corbyn being Prime Minister on June the 9th. And I think unless something dramatic happens, Theresa May will be Prime Minister on June the 9th, much as she is today. The question is, on what basis is she going to be a Prime Minister? She's clearly seeking, and she's been quite explicit about this, a basis to govern where she doesn't have to answer to anybody, where she can basically do what she likes. She has a blank check. She has an entire free hand to impose any Brexit deal, or indeed no deal, on the country. And I do believe that a significantly larger Lib Dem parliamentary party, my own view, but listen, I'm no sophologist and my prediction is almost always wrong, but my hunch is, it's just a hunch, is that actually we're going to do much better than a lot of these instant polls now say. But look, time will tell. But I guess the answer to your question is, do you think having a larger Lib Dem parliamentary party, which is now the only UK-wide parliamentary party leading the fight against hard Brexit, is that a good thing or not? I think it is indisputably a good thing, because otherwise, we clearly can't rely on Labour to do the job that an opposition should do on this matter. The SNP is only interested in using this whole episode to promote Scottish independence. And so I think, I do think it's really important that you have more Lib Dem MPs who are prepared to stand against a future which actually many people, even Brexit voters, didn't necessarily vote for last year.
Final question, Nick Clegg. You mentioned the Norwegian model. Many, if not most, informed observers think that's probably the best we can hope for, but it would entail freedom of movement remaining in place. Can you conceive of circumstances in which the country would accept that? Having spoken to a number of folk in other European capitals, not least a clutch of prime ministers and heads of government, I'm absolutely convinced myself that in the wake of the referendum, if Theresa May had gone, quietly to have a sauerkraut dinner with Angela Merkel and wine and dine other prime ministers, if she had said to them, listen, I want to remain part of Margaret Thatcher's single market, but I'm afraid I can't do that without significant alterations to the way in which freedom of movement works, I think they would have absolutely jumped at the chance to find a new compromise on that basis. And by the way, we mustn't think that somehow we are utterly unique in having vexed public debates about immigration. Sure.
The Mediterranean refugee crisis has elicited huge concerns, if about immigration from outside the EU, but nonetheless the movement of peoples across Europe is a massive political issue. And these people are politicians themselves. I think they would have bent over backwards to do a new deal which would have cut Britain some slack on freedom of movement if that meant keeping the United Kingdom in the single market. Funny enough, I don't think that's the problem. The problem is the following. The single market, unlike what the Brexiteers keep saying, is not really about tariffs at all. The whole point of the thing that Margaret Thatcher and Jacques Delors created at the time was it's all about making sure there's one set of rules, not 28 bits of red tape impeding trade. And you can't be part of a marketplace of rules if you're not prepared to abide by the rules and the rulings of the single market. So I do think there is a kind of a rock and a hard place decision about whether you respect rulings from the European Court of Justice. But in answer to your question, I do think we could have squared the circle as far as freedom of movement was concerned if the government had sought to do so.
That wasn't quite my question, although it was a very detailed and interesting answer. The question was whether or not you think it could happen now, not whether or not it could have happened 9 months ago.
I still think it could happen. Okay. I think the rest of the European Union would always prefer to have such a large market such as ours in the single market rather than out of it.
Great stuff. Nick Clegg, many thanks indeed. The Liberal Democrat MP, that's the job description now, although of course it has in the past included Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the party. He hopes to remain the Liberal Democrat MP for Sheffield Hallam after announcing this morning that his candidacy is going forward. Not true of everybody, by the way. Some fairly big names who won't be running in the election in June. Alan Johnson at the top of the list for Labour, and more names coming through, I presume, in the course of the next couple of days. Time now is 10:46. And by way of an illustration from today's news, people who don't understand the big issues, or people who do understand the big issues but choose to pretend that they don't in order to persuade you to do things that are against your own interest, will today be pointing to the IMF's revision of its growth forecasts for the British economy, which have been revised upwards, largely because we're still in for another couple of years. The forecast of what we're going to look like when we leave is a different ballgame altogether. But you can sell that to the populace, you can sell that to the mob as proof that Project Fear was wrong. I don't know what newspaper you read, but you may have encountered this already today. Look, you see, the IMF people who do understand these issues and people who do have your interests at heart will then point out to you that uniquely in the developed world and uniquely in the European Union, the average citizen of this country benefits not a jot from economic growth. So wage stagnation coupled with economic growth means one thing and one thing only. It means the people who've already got a bunch of money are getting richer. You look at the graphs and you will see that the United Kingdom is performing, I haven't got it directly in front of me, I think it's even worse than Greece on this, on the relationship between economic growth and personal economic circumstance. So every single time you hear someone pointing to IMF forecasts as proof that things aren't bad, they are punching you in the face and laughing, because they know, or I guess it's a question of whether they're being deceitful or incompetent. They either do know the truth about the relationship between economic growth on a national level and personal economic circumstance, and they're pretending not to understand that in order to get you to do stupid things because they're rich and they get richer when you do, or they just don't get it. That's why this phrase economic growth has become so meaningless, particularly in the context of British politics. 10:52 is the time. We are where we are. But if you suggest that you might want to know where we're going before deciding that it's a good idea or a bad idea, you're a saboteur or a traitor. We're just examining that suggestion at the moment. 10:52 is the time. Philip is in Harrow. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello,
James. Ardent listener.
Ardent?
Well, using that, or I'm addicted, shall we say.
That's good. That's a healthy addiction.
All right, then. It is. Look, your analogy on the car is a bit, if I may say so,
simplistic.
Not appropriate on this occasion. I'll tell you why. We've been driving this car for a long time. Not the Brexit, I mean...
the one we're in now. We'll call it the status quo car.
Right, okay. And we've been driving it, and unfortunately, Cameron went down there and said to them, look, I mean, engine's a bit, exhaust is falling off. Can we do something about this? Unfortunately, they said, no way. Go back our way or highway. And that has given birth to this Brexit, which is complete chaos, I tell you. I agree with you. It's emotional rather than the car analogy.
Well, no, hang on a minute. I accept. I'm going to add your observation to my analogy. I'm not going to allow you to dismiss it. So we know what car we're in, and it's not perfect. You know, you're right. There's a bit of a rattle in the back, and that windscreen wiper keeps sort of sticking whenever the weather's bad. But at least I know what it's like. I can see its flaws. You know, I've got the extra strong mint stuck under the passenger seat, and I've got all of that. But I know what it's like. I've driven it. I've looked under the bonnet. I've got the logbook in the. You know, you're supposed to call it the phone compartment now, Philip, not the glove compartment, because it encourages people to put. My daughter told me this, to put their phone in out of reach in the car. But I've got the logbook there. I can see the mileometer. I know what the mileage is. I'm still in touch with Doris from up the road, who I bought it off. I know who all the previous owners are. So yeah, you're right. It's not perfect. But if I suggest that I don't want to buy the car you're selling me until I've seen it, how can I be a traitor or a saboteur?
The point is, Nick was absolutely right. The way I think Cameron should have hammered a point bit more. There are issues.
He didn't say Cameron should have done. He said Theresa May should have done, because
I know. But even if Cameron or anyone who's negotiating, if they had made these points clear, because these issues are problems to Europeans too. Nick is absolutely right. I think they have discovered the problems under the bonnet too, and someone's got to sit down and sort this out, because it's in everybody's advantage. I don't know why they're missing this. I really don't.
Well, I mean, we don't know, do we? Because the minute anybody reports in this country that Theresa May has suggested to our former or our soon-to-be former European Union partners that we may retain some of the four pillars, some of the four freedoms, she becomes a traitor. No,
I think that's really wrong. I think they should get together before it really gets out of hand, because this is, they should say, all right.
Before it gets out of hand. Death to traitors.
Yeah, no, I think by calling these, they're not getting anywhere. I really think they should. It's in everybody's interest. I mean, they should get.
Except it's not, because people like you and I, we can't see the shine. We don't know what it is that's so shiny about this car that we're not allowed to look at, examine, or question in any way. But it's so shiny that we're definitely going to trade in the car that you've described with the extra strong wind stuck under the passenger seat and the wonky windscreen wiper. We're trading that in now for the shiny new car that we're not allowed to look at.
Yeah, I agree.
Happy days, Philip. Happy days. It's 10:56. I set myself up as a car salesman, actually. Steve is in Watford. Steve, what's going on?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello,
I think me and you are going to go a little bit of a round here, mate. First things first, Nick Clegg, I think it's a bit two-faced of him talking about the youth of today when he stabbed all the youth of today.
Well, he did acknowledge that, Steve.
Piece. Say again?
He did acknowledge that pretty explicitly.
Yeah, well, but that's a bit two-faced.
Yeah, he did. He said that himself.
You keep going on about this car. Well, okay, we haven't seen the car. We haven't seen the shine. We don't know about the logbook. But just say, for argument's sake, the salesman's your mum. That's it. That's why a lot of people are going to follow Theresa May, because they trust her. That's my analogy.
But she wanted us to vote to remain.
Yeah, but she's gone in. She's the leader of the Conservatives now, and she's got to go. No,
but when do we trust her? When she told us to remain, or when she says Brexit means Brexit?
Hold it, Nick. Sorry, James. I'm a Remainer.
Yes.
I've got a place in Spain. I've got a daughter who lives in Germany who made a success of her life out in Germany. I want to stay in Europe, but the thing is, we've got to go with best of a bad job now, haven't we?
Have we? Because Nick Clegg said not. I think you're probably right.
Change.
Yes.
Listen, the only way this is going to change is for Tim Farron to stand up and say, "You vote Liberal Democrat, and I will reverse Article 50 and stay in the EU." I would vote for him, and he would get millions of votes. But he won't do that, will he? He's going to give us a. He's going to.
No, I think he has. He has pretty much done that. Has he not?
What he said. No, what he said was that he will give us a vote on what she comes back with. But that is not the same.
Well, that's what Corbyn wants. No, I think Farron is committed to retaining...
No, he's not committed to it. He's saying he'll give us a vote on what she comes back with. What I'm saying, and if Tim Farron's listening to this, or obviously Nick Clegg is, so he can pass it on, if he was to stand up and say, if you vote for Liberal Democrat, I will reverse Article 50, he will get millions. He's got nothing to lose. He got wiped out in the last election. He's got nothing to lose, but he won't do it because he hasn't got the gumption. He will not.
I don't want to fall out with you, Steve, but this is his pledge.
It's not his pledge. He's saying he's going to give a vote.
No.
On a second referendum.
Well, you have to have. He can't revoke Article 50 without a vote.
Yeah, he's not saying that. He's saying he's going to give a vote in Parliament to what they come back with. He's not said that he will reverse.
Sorry, we're going to fall out, I think. The Liberal Democrat policy is to have a second referendum.
Right, and my third part is...
Well, hang on a minute. You don't get to have another go after your last go falls apart. The Liberal Democrat manifesto pledge is to have a second referendum. So will you vote for them?
Yes, it's a second referendum on what she comes back with.
No, it can't. Good God, man, it isn't. It's a second referendum on whether we leave or remain in the European Union.
Well, listen, if that's true, I stand corrected. And
there we go. We got there in the end, except for the if. You like my 8-year-old when she's apologising. I'm sorry, but I'm sorry if. There is no if. There is no but. You stand corrected, Stephen. Although I would buy a car off your mum. We continue to react to yesterday's announcement of a so-called snap general election. And it is an election, whatever the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell may have said elsewhere this morning. We still struggle, I have to tell you, to get senior Labour politicians to talk to us. And I mean, I say us. Obviously, there are some people on this radio station that you could understand anybody wanting to avoid. But in terms of the decent people that work here, like Nick Ferrari and myself and Ian Dale and Sheila Fogarty, you have a pretty broad spectrum of position and opinion, and yet I don't think any of us have been able to get Jeremy Corbyn to talk to us. I think has John McDonnell spoken to any of us? I think John McDonnell has, but we can't get close to Corbyn. McDonnell wouldn't talk to us today. I don't know why. I'm not part of that process. I'm not part of that thought process. But to hear him say as Shadow Chancellor, that he follows me on Twitter actually, so you'd think he might give me a buzz occasionally, that this is not about Brexit, when it's, I think in the minds of most of us, about nothing else, is remarkable. And it is the Labour Party's positioning in this looming election that is going to be the most historic, the most significant. The predictions of potential annihilation on the one hand, and the massive, as you just heard during the news bulletin there, the massive dissatisfaction among rank and file members. It's not a silver lining exactly, because we're looking in many ways at a kind of death of democracy. In some senses, if you really are supportive of a Prime Minister who describes parliamentary opposition as being against the national interest, and you really are supportive of newspaper rhetoric that describes people asking questions and just asking for some evidence as saboteurs, then you are sort of cheering the death of some of democracy's most potent weapons. The only silver lining of sorts is this, you know how tribal everything's got lately? For reasons that, again, I don't fully understand, but 80% of American Republicans support the bombing of Syria. But 6 months ago, they didn't. What's changed? Well, they're in charge now. So when Donald Trump wants to drop bombs on Syria, 80% of Republicans are in favour of it. When Barack Obama mooted the same identical policy, 20% of Republicans were in favour of it. So the policy is irrelevant. It's just a question of the tribal loyalty. Ed Miliband's energy cap. You remember when he came out with a very high-profile policy that would stop energy firms from being able to inflate their prices without any checks, balances or controls? He was essentially called a communist by much of the right-wing media, and indeed by some of his opponents in the Conservative Party. It's almost certain to be in Theresa May's manifesto. That policy, that identical policy, and all of the people who called it communism will be cheering it. The policy hasn't changed. All that's changed is the tribe. So this tribalism appears on many levels to be almost the enemy of freedom of thought. But when you come to the Labour Party, a silver lining of sorts is that Jeremy Corbyn has somehow broken tribalism. A lot of people who would have seen themselves as tribal Labour supporters historically are now looking around for a new home. Of course, he's simultaneously enhanced tribalism among the core support that he enjoys in the National Party by almost creating, I think unintentionally, a sort of personality cult in which any criticism is seen as anathema. Even one of his own MPs has now been reported to the Chief Whip for sending a letter complaining about stuff, because apparently he should have gone to his line manager. Also, last night, I'm told at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, he didn't mention the word winning once. He didn't mention the concept of winning once. And I would have thought even more remarkably, they were still talking about the so-called trigger ballot, i.e. examining the possibility that all Labour MPs would have to seek re-selection from their own constituency Labour parties before they could go on to fight a general election that is due to unfold in 7 weeks' time. Just think about that for a minute. What? You're even contemplating asking all of your troops to fight an internal battle in a constituency Labour Party that has possibly been infiltrated by the hard left before they can even go out on the doorstep and start trying to win votes for a general election. That suggests that the priority for the Labour leadership is not winning a general election. You're welcome to give me a call and tell me what you think their priority is. It's been ruled out, well, actually, the Telegraph still reports it today as something that's going to be discussed at NEC level today. But my information from the Parliamentary Labour Party is that it was on the agenda, it was talked about, and it was shouted down. Then again, in this political climate, who knows? 11:08 is the time. Back to Dean in Bermondsey. Dean, what's going on?
Yeah, James. When you said about the Daily Mail and why they have such headlines, because basically, to me, it seems fairly obvious. If you look at from how all the right-wing press stand up, is basically they all wanted for Brexit to happen. So, and for Amazon, you see people say, well, it's happening, we're leaving, get on with it. Actually, we've triggered Article 50 and we are leaving.
Yes.
At the moment, today, as Nick Clegg said, is that basically if Theresa May or whoever the Prime Minister went to the European Union and said, basically, we've had a change of thought, can we do this, can we do that? Now, there are people you get the so-called elite people say, well, that makes sense to do it, and you'd get the other people on the other side saying, no, we voted to leave. But invariably, this is not a done deal until we've left, until the final deal is done. And so if you're Paul Dacre or the right-wing media and people who want to leave, and even people who voted for it, they will say, well, you've got to keep pushing. It's not done until it's done. So you have to keep pushing. And until this actually gets to this position where we've left, we will continue to get this where you have people on the side wanting to leave, because they're so to find themselves in the position where we've actually left, they're thinking, this is great, we never thought we'd get here. This is like all of our dreams come true.
But where do they think they've got to? This is the thing, this is the shininess that you can't see, or I can't see. What is it that's so shiny, apart from the colour of passports? And you know, this isn't even meant to sound insulting, but it will. Bendy bananas, or whatever the phrase is. What is it that's so shiny that it's enough to persuade me to buy the car?
All I can say on that front is that when I wanted to stay, I passionately believe in staying.
Yes.
So anything that I'm going to say is going to sound derogatory and demeaning, because I think that it's about going back to being Little Englanders. And that's where I...
But how is that shiny? What's the thrill you get from that?
Because there's, as you said, it's all the nostalgia of being, you know, when we was Great Britain. People say about being...
We still are great. It's a wonderful country. It's the best place in the world. Why do you think so many people want to come and work here and raise their families here?
But what I'm saying, I'm not arguing that. The point is that we had a higher standing in the world. And basically, everything, and from my point of view, this standing can only go down. It will only reduce because of economically we're weaker. We're going to have less say in Europe, and these things all what lead on. We could quite easily find ourselves within the space of 2 or 3 years where the union breaks up. The Scots wanted to leave. The Northern Irish are not very happy. So we could find it could be in 20 or 30 years. We could be not Great Britain. We could be England. And England would be not sitting. We say, we have got a guaranteed place on the Security Council. If we become England, I think we'd be pretty quickly bumped off of that. Now, people will phone up and say he's talking nonsense, which is fine. But if you had less economic power and things like that, and if the union went and say, you're just doom-mongering and all these things, as I think Nick Clegg quite the thing on Question Time a couple of weeks ago. Trade works as the closer it is, the more you do. So, i.e., Europe is always going to be our biggest trading.
Well, let's hope it's wrong. Let's hope he's wrong. I mean, we have to now. Everyone has to start hoping that all of these apparently self-evident truths are wrong. That it makes a lot more sense to be doing trade deals with China than it does with France.
It makes sense to. The point is that if. And all the people who voted to say the Brexiteers say about leaving is that it doesn't matter. We can sign all new trade deals. Anybody who knows that if you try and deal with if you're a small supplier and you try and deal with a big company, they don't care about you. They don't care about you. And this is what it'll be, is the European, who has and same with the Americans and the Chinese. When we go and say we'll do a deal, they say, of course we'll have a deal with you, but these are the terms.
And it takes years to do. So Tony Blair's written an article for The Independent, and in it he effectively says that the reasoning behind the decision to call it now is that things are going to get very, very messy. Still, I think it's important in the hope of engendering some semblance of unity. It's important to stress that at the end of the messiness, things could be great and everybody hopes they will be, but stuff is going to get so messy in terms of household bills, in terms of the difficulty of the negotiations, the complications, the complexities, that she's called it now so that when the sun starts going down, she doesn't become electorally vulnerable. Although how she'd ever be electorally vulnerable to Jeremy Corbyn is a conversation that we'll have later in the programme. She's called it now because things are going to get messy, things are going to get ugly, things are going to get complicated. What hope do you have that there's ever going to be a reverse? That however complicated and however messy it gets, the climate we're living in now, no one's ever going to throw their hands up and say maybe we should start again and have a bit of a rethink. And just to clarify on what the Liberal Democrats' position is after my toing and froing with Steve, the manifesto pledge is to stay in the single market, and the second referendum would be to decide whether or not the deal we're offered is something that we want or not, which seems to me to be so logical. I may have misunderstood Steve. That's so logical to say this is the deal, this is the car, you can now vote on whether or not you want to buy it. What makes you think that we're ever going to get a chance to do that?
Well, we're not, are we? But
no.
The point is that with Theresa, if you're Theresa May, right? Basically, this is her position. Her position is that, or this is how I think it is. I'd like to have my 5 years to start from now. That'd be a good idea, because that gets me a longer time to do things. I'd like loads more MPs. Why not? To be honest, it's a politically logical, sensible decision. It makes sense to do it because she obviously wants longer to do it. Why? There is no Prime Minister in history, Tony Blair, anyone would say, "Do you want a shorter time to achieve your goals?" Of course they don't.
No, but they do, mate. You've got them screaming at you from the back benches that we want to leave yesterday. So there's still a significant swathe of support in the Conservative Party for the idea that they should have triggered Article 50 on the day after the referendum result, and then just, if the negotiations don't seem to be going well, apparently we can pick our ball up and go home, despite the fact that they own the ball and the goalpost and the pitch.
That's not changing. Basically, what she's saying is that, I mean, if you look from a narrow interest, she gets 5 years from June the 8th, which is better than 3 years So she got longer, and she's got longer. She's got longer to deliver whatever it is she's going to deliver. And
but simultaneously saying that when I deliver whatever it is I'm going to deliver, nobody is allowed to question it or vote against it or suggest that it's not as good as what we've already got. That's the bit that's scary, Dean.
Well, of course it's a bit scary, but the point is, I mean, look, the fact is, right, is you never give a sucker an even break. If you're in front... Oh,
I get that. No, that's simple pragmatism.
Hang on, James. When you're in front, right, basically, they don't want to give anyone ever another chance because it's not signed, it's not sealed, it's not delivered. So basically, you don't give someone... I mean, look, it's logical to say... If I think I'm so clever and I'm better than you at something, I'll say, well, keep playing, James, and I'll keep beating you. But if I beat you once lucky, I want to be the champion. It's like heavyweight boxing. They all fight each other. Why is that? They never fight the good ones because they know they're going to lose.
You pick the one you're going to win, which adds to the idea that this is as good as it's going to get in the pre-Brexit Britain. This is as good as it's ever going to look. So you have some economic forecasts that you can pretend mean that people aren't suffering economically. You have some sort of background noise that you can pretend is positive and upbeat. You can rely on the editor of the Daily Mail to keep portraying anyone asking for basic parliamentary democracy, sovereignty, scrutiny. You can portray them as saboteurs and traitors and enemies of the people. The idea that this is as good as it's going to get for Theresa May, and that's why she's called the general election, is probably something that everyone can agree on. Dean, signed, sealed and delivered. I'm yours. I'm going to rein in the analogy a little bit because my analogies always do get so stretched to breaking point. I think Dean, a brilliant caller. Dean, if you're still listening, mate, a couple of people saying you should have your own show. I'm inclined to agree with them. We've got heavyweight boxers in the car now, but this is the point, I think. This is the focus, finally, finding something that we can all look at together and address. The deal, whatever it is, at the end of the negotiation process, okay, here it is, the deal. Now, if you want to know what it is before you decide whether you like it or not, you're a traitor, you're a saboteur, you're a Ramona. You might have voted leave, but you're still a Ramona and a traitor and a saboteur, because until you can really arrive at your final conclusion about whether or not this is something you want to buy, whether or not this is something that you like, you should be able to see it. It seems to me, and I am beginning to question my own sanity sometimes, because so much of the media seems to be swimming in the opposite direction. I always like swimming against the tide, but not when it's such a lonely business as it is at the moment, just to ask questions. This is what I thought journalism was about. Not to offer an opinion today, just to ask a question, which is, how can anybody have a strong opinion about the merits of the deal that Theresa May or may not bring back from Brussels 2 years hence? How can anybody have a strong opinion about that deal? How can anybody say it's going to be great? It's brilliant, I want to buy it. How can suggesting that we should see it before we decide what it's like be in any way controversial? And that seems to me, forgive the little pat on the back, but that seems to me to distill down to its very essence the whole Brexit debate. At this point in time, you are telling me that if I say, I don't know what I think about the deal until I've seen it, and when I've seen it, can I then tell you whether or not I like it or not? You're telling me that that's in any way controversial or dangerous or treacherous, and I don't get that. I really don't, unless you just are terrified of scrutiny, absolutely terrified of scrutiny. Why would you be terrified of scrutiny? Well, one theory would be that because you told a lot of lies to get me to vote in a certain way, and you have two choices. You either admit that, or you ban anybody from pointing out the lies by calling them traitors or saboteurs. It's a slightly grim analysis. And of course, we're supposed to be talking about the election as well. Peter is in Thirsk. Peter, what would you like to say?
Good morning, and thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
On a busy day. Can I respectfully say I think your analysis is a little bit premature in this sense?
Yes, of course you can.
First of all, one of the things the Prime Minister said yesterday was that this election will give the opportunity for all the parties to put their stance concerning Brexit in front of the British people. She made it very clear she'd taken it as far as triggering Article 50, and now all the parties will be able to present their manifestos. Now that will enable the public to look at, to use your car analogy, to look at, the performance, the way...
Well, no, except, sorry to interrupt, but Emily Thornberry on Newsnight last night said they might not pick a side. She actually said that they didn't really know what their position was on Brexit.
Well, that just demonstrates just how disunited some of the parties are on this issue and the difficult position they are in.
Well, yes.
But the second thing, this is where it's important, if you look at the history of the last almost 12 months, constantly the Prime Minister has faced people popping up rather like that old Harry Anfield character and saying, I wouldn't do it like that, I'd do it a different way.
Yes.
And also the House of Lords, or members of the House of Lords, saying we might take a different view in our House to the way in which the Commons have voted, and the rider on that being because this was not a manifesto commitment. So I think if we have the position where the various parties put in their manifesto what their stance is going to be concerning Brexit and other policies, then the Prime Minister will be able to go forward after the election and have the manifesto commitment, which will place the House of Lords in particular in a position where they've got to allow the government's legislation or negotiating position and final vote in both houses to go through. But may I also say a wider thing?
In a minute, because I want to respond to what you've already said first. And I can see respectfully two problems with it. The first is that they can stick whatever they want in the manifesto pledge. The terms of the deal that we do with the European Union is going to be decided by the 27 remaining members of the European Union, not by us.
Yes, but
so they can tell us what they're going to aim for. They can tell us they're going to aim for the moon. They can tell us that they're going to deliver a unicorn to every front step in Britain by the end of tea time on Tuesday, but it doesn't matter. And the second thing is, I think you're missing my central concern, whether you're talking about the House of Lords exercising their historic right to scrutinise legislation and not liking that, or whether you're talking about this increasingly sort of broad-term mandate. I want to see the deal before I decide what I think about it. And so do the House of Lords, and so do the Liberal Democrats, and so should the Labour Party, and so should every single member of the Conservative Party, and so should you, and so should Ronald in Watford, who's up next, and so should everybody. Before you decide whether you like something or not, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, surely you have to see it. And after you've seen it, you should be allowed to offer your opinion.
I agree with you entirely, but what you will see before the election campaign starts, or as the election campaign starts, is the manifesto, and that will give the approach that the various parties are going to take to negotiating.
I don't think it will. I hope you're right, but I don't think it will. I actually don't think you're right on this. I think you've seen what they're going to... It's going to say things like Brexit means Brexit, or the country is coming together. You're not going to see... We're going to really drill down on this little bit of trade here, and this sector here, and tariffs here, and the car industry here, and the medical agency here. You're just not going to get that. You're not going to get proper policy. You're going to get slogans and cheerleading.
I think you're right. There will be lines to take and messaging. But if I may just quickly...
Yes, of course you may.
...wider point, and
yes.
That is the second thing that Theresa attracted support for when she was looking to be leader of the Conservative Party was the second strand, which is and build a country that works for everyone.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is, whilst we are in this real confusion about our approach to negotiating with the Harry Enfield character, as I described before, she can't get on with that domestic agenda which drives forward the Joseph Chamberlain approach, the more socially aware approach, the wider social policy approach that she would want to have in government.
Well, you believe she would want to have in government. So some of the evidence offered up in terms of behaviour since those words were issued on the steps of Downing Street after she assumed the mantle of Prime Ministership are somewhat at odds with the expressed ambition. But I completely respect your right to still believe in that message.
Well, we're being extraordinarily respectful.
I think that's got to be the way forward, Peter. I extraordinarily respectfully respect you.
I think that the sort of Daily Mail headline this morning is distinctly unhelpful to the nation.
Yeah, but I fear that the reason why we can be distinctly respectful to each other while arguing the toss and discussing the detail is because we both feel that way, even though we might disagree with each other. The Daily Mail knows its constituency very, 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 very well, and it knows full well that operating the bile ducts on overflow is not only a very effective business model, it also sways votes. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Peter, thank you. Peter in Thursley, I think he's rung in before, so I'll spare him the questions about the local fish and chip shop that was my late father's favourite in the whole of Yorkshire. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQ's due to unfold at 12. After that, there's a debate and then a vote on the... They're voting to suspend the Fixed Term Parliament Act, or are they voting to abolish it altogether? No, they're voting to have a general election under the terms of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. So, as you were on that, the vote is almost certain to be passed. They need a 2/3 majority to get over the line. The likelihood of that not happening, and I'll make a prediction even in these febrile times, is pretty close to nil. And Danish fishermen are demanding punitive tariffs on British fish sold in the EU if they are denied access to UK waters after Brexit. Reasons to be cheerful. Well, IMF have revised their forecasts on Britain's economic growth upwards from where it was previously. Don't mention the fact that Britain's relationship between national economic growth and personal economic circumstances, I think, the worst in the world. And, of course, the IMF story, guess whose economy is doing even better than ours in terms of the IMF predicted growth? Spain, which was one of the great reasons for leaving the EU, because Spain was in such an economic mess. Happy days. 11:34 is the time. Ronald is in Watford. Ronald, what have you got for me?
Hi, James. Well, to have a look at the call for the elections, I mean, you also need to look at what actually Theresa May has done to her own party. Is the Conservative Party still the ones were accustomed to under Cameron? I don't think so. What she has done is really she's transformed the whole Conservative Party by adopting and partly achieving the manifesto from UKIP from 2015. That's what she's done. And if you see how she handled, for instance, opposition within her party, think of Lord Heseltine. He was sacked of all his consultancy jobs after standing up and speaking up in the House of Lords, or even worse, Ken Clarke, you know. And having now an election, this offers her to get rid of all those backbenchers, which she can't rely on fully.
Do you know, I always thought that politics was an attractive path to follow if you really liked debating and arguing. And this is a huge error, isn't it, Ronald? Because politics is attractive, it seems, increasingly, whether you're looking at Turkey or whether you're looking at your analysis of the Palace of Westminster. This is now a political landscape in which people who hate debating and arguing are thriving. People who either like to throw out their soundbites unchallenged, or who like to describe opposition and scrutiny as being against the national interest or an act of sabotage.
Well, obviously, the current Prime Minister is a little bit sort of Erdogan style. And if you see, she doesn't like and she doesn't tolerate other opinions, not in a party and certainly not outside of it.
Well, 54% of her own constituency are of the opinion that we should have stayed in the European Union. I wonder if they're saboteurs or people acting against the national interest. That's her own constituents.
Yeah, but obviously she doesn't care about her constituents, does she?
I don't know that I can allow you to keep swinging at the Prime Minister in this way, Ronald. It's, you know, she is where she is, and she's about to lead her party to probably to a massive election victory. So a lot of people are seeing things they rather like the look of.
I wouldn't really bang too much on that, because there's a lot of people which are not in the same way feeling about the Conservative Party as they did a year ago when the referendum was. And I think
but what are you going to do instead?
Well, this is just the thing. She's talking about it and make people believe there is no turning back. But I would say that the electorate is free to choose. And if the electorate is voting on the 8th of June, not in favor of a party, even going back to the European Union is coming as an option. Even if the leader of the Labour Party likes it or not, he also has to think about this option, you know. There might be people which are saying the way you are selling us now at the moment is not we want it.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to speak. Oh, this is part of the process of silencing and sabotaging and death to traitors and crush the saboteurs, is that people who might be pointing in the direction you describe are being... What's the word I'm looking for? They're being undermined. They're being dispossessed almost of their right to hold a view. That's the stage we seem to be reaching now, which is silence them.
This is our chance. This is our chance to stop the Ayatollahs of Brexitism. It is absolutely to get rid of that case, and I don't like to...
How is it then? I mean, honestly, how is it our chance to get rid of the Ayatollahs of Brexitism? Given that the Labour Party... Yeah, go on.
If they're switching their brain on and they see what's really happening, somebody waffling about more justice in society and having 3.8 million people on the wait list of the NHS. Now, this is obviously quite a contrast, isn't it?
Yes.
So there's one thing people are saying, and there's another thing they're doing. And if voters are maybe for a moment really taking these figures seriously, would it actually now still make a difference for Mr. Rees-Mogg if it was 3.8 million on the waiting list or 10 million?
Again, I think you're doing detail. You're looking in the logbook. You're asking for evidence of what the mileage is. You want to talk about all the previous owners. And people like Mr. Rees-Mogg, arguably, are just in the business of telling punters how shiny the new car is going to be. 11:38 is the time. Ronald, thank you. Mel is in Pimlico. Mel, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello, Mel.
I don't usually call, so this is my first time, so excuse me if I'm a bit nervous.
Don't be, it's only me.
Thank you. So just, I suppose, in regards to the whole conversation that you're having, the EU itself has huge financial problems and huge financial deficits. For example, we look at Greece, we look at Italy. Italy's, apparently, you know, its banks are collapsing. The EU didn't recapitalise its banks in 2008. They just wanted to patch everything up, and that's where the problem is, whereas we recapitalised our banks. The reason David Cameron got voted in the first place when he first got voted in was because he promised the people an EU referendum, and he got, you know, a landslide vote on that basis, I believe.
He didn't get a landslide vote. I mean,
not a landslide.
Let's just say he won. He got
the election.
He got an incredibly small majority, which is why Theresa May's called an election yesterday in the hope of increasing it.
Okay, but people did vote, and I don't believe that, you know, 17 million people were, you know, out of their minds and didn't know what they were doing.
Well, no, of course not. Of course, no one's suggesting they were out of their minds and didn't know what they were doing, but they're suggesting that when they know even more, then they should have still the right to speak their mind.
Of course, that's right. But, for example, if you have a general election and we vote in a party, we're not going to be able to reverse that because the lot that didn't get voted in don't like it.
Of course you can. So, that's what every election is for.
Well, that's when it comes round every 5 years, yeah?
No, whenever the Prime Minister wants it. You saw what happened yesterday. It's less than 2 years since the last election.
At the Prime Minister's discretion, yeah. Of course.
Or under the terms of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, the opposition actually have to agree.
Yeah, of course. And also, in regards to your analogy of, you know, seeing the deal, obviously people feel that, you know, there was problems before, and that's why, you know, this vote was brought about. And the NHS has had problems for many years and so on.
We had the highest ever patient satisfaction levels in 2010.
Well, we've got a higher number of population, so, you know, if we...
No, the highest ever level of patient satisfaction since records began within the NHS was recorded in 2010. It's nowhere near that now, but in 2010, when David Cameron won his first non-landslide election and had to form a coalition, the NHS was more highly regarded by patients than it has been before or since.
Yeah, but we've got a higher number of people now, so more than we had in 2010. The population's forever increasing, whether it's baby boomers, immigration, and so on. And
yes,
the finances need to be put up, and the infrastructure needs to be built to keep up with that.
Right.
So if you have more people, you're going to need more schools, you're going to need more infrastructure, new towns being built, railway links, and so on.
I don't know why you're telling me that. I mean,
Because you're saying that the NHS in 2010 had the highest level of satisfaction, but today that satisfaction is not there.
After 7 years of a Conservative Prime Minister.
Okay, I understand. So I understand that, you know, we can disagree.
Well, either a government is responsible for the NHS's performance or it isn't. I believe it is, and I think you're arguing that it isn't.
Well, there is a lot of, as well, bureaucracy, and there was a lot of new things brought in where there's been management systems put in.
Brought in by whom?
Well, by the government.
Well, there you go. So if patient satisfaction has gone down over the course of that 7 years because of things that the government has done, who do you think you should blame for it?
Well, I don't think you should blame one person, because even though you're saying that...
I said the government.
The government.
You said the government have brought these things in and they've been bad. And I've said, whose fault is that? Surely the only answer to that is the government.
It does filter down to the communities, and it does filter down to the workforce. And if you...
I don't know what that means, Mel.
Well, what that means is, if, for example, I put in a tender to a bid for a government contract to run a particular service, and I'm not running that service efficiently, then it's not just down to the government. It's down.
We're going a little bit off the beaten track here. Okay, so I think, if I've understood you correctly, you're saying the EU is so awful. I don't care what the new car looks like. I want to buy it anyway.
It's not about I don't care what the new car looks like, but your analogy in regards to that, if people feel like, for example, someone in a mental abusive situation.
Just get back on the just simple message. EU, what is it that people are missing when they say, I want to know what the deal is before I decide whether I want it or not? You're saying, no, you don't need to. Why don't I need to?
It's not. No, I'm not saying that you don't need to. Of course,
okay.
If you want, you know, we're not in that situation where we're...
Well, we are. Theresa May is saying that the Labour Party are wrong for wanting a vote on the terms of the final deal. The Daily Mail are calling people saboteurs if they want to know what the deal is before they decide whether they want it or not.
No, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and I understand your point, but no, the deal hasn't. It's not here yet.
Exactly. So how can anyone have an opinion on it?
Exactly, because the deal hasn't been put forward to the EU itself. So we're not even at that stage where she is in the process of negotiation, but of course her party members and the people that she works with and the departments that she works with, she has to work with all these people. So she's not the sole decision maker. She has to have these cabinet meetings, and things have to be discussed on the table. It's just in regards to, I suppose, it being let out to the public and eventually being put out across the parties.
But she said she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to have any scrutiny of the deal that they finally managed to strike. She doesn't want to have a parliamentary vote on it. She doesn't want to have a second referendum on it, as Tim Farron and the Liberal Democrats are promoting. She doesn't want anybody to be able to take the car for a test drive before they have to get in it for the rest of their lives. I may have misunderstood you, in which case I apologise. It's 11:45. Joanne Webb is in the LBC Travel Centre.
Thanks, James. Good morning. Long delays continue northbound in London up to the Blackwall Tunnel after 3 separate accidents much earlier on this morning. The tunnels have been open now for a while, but it's still very slow all the way back to the Sun in the Sands. There's also been an accident on the A2 in London. It's westbound and it's on Shooters Hill Road, and there are long delays all the way back to Kidbrooke Park Road. In Northamptonshire, the A45 was blocked westbound at junction 15 of the M1. One lane is now open, but it's still very slow. This is after that car was on fire. In South Lanarkshire, there are long delays on the M74 northbound up to junction junction 43. That's at the M73 exit. There are delays of about an hour, and that's because of an accident. It's involving quite a number of cars in the roadworks. That's why it's so busy on the approach. And still no London Overground trains between Camden Road and Willesden Junction. For more real-time traffic updates, go to lbc.co.uk.
LBC.
You have one new message. No message left.
Sound familiar? It's not the sound of silence. It's the sound of your customers not being able to get in touch. So take back control with eReceptionist. eReceptionist answers and directs all your calls, ensuring your customers always get an answer and you always get the business. Take a free 30-day trial at eReceptionist.co.uk. Free trial must be cancelled within 30 days to avoid charges.
So, you're interested in building a property development business, but feeling unsure about the tax and legal implications and the potential pitfalls. You might have questions like, what business structure do I need? Should I incorporate? What about VAT and stamp duty? Or you may want to know how to minimize taxation on profits and learn about inheritance tax issues. For help, speak to Barnes Rofe, clever accountants for property businesses. Visit barnesrofe.com/radio.
Here at Admiral HQ, we have the best insurance nerds, like Nigel.
Hello.
Apart from memorising the hits of Bryan Adams, 1984 to 2004, Nigel made it possible for you to add any of your family to an Admiral multi-car policy at any time that suits you. Whoa, they love you, Nigel. They want to thank you for all the discounts.
I'd just like to say, everything I do it for you.
Oh, Nigel. Admiral, looking out for you.
The Multi-York Spring Sofa Sale is now on. Get up to 40% off quality sofas, plus an extra 10% off everything, in store and at multiyork.co.uk.
My dad's workplace is Dad's. He's got a spinny chair. Well, my dad's workplace has DAB Plus radio with Bluetooth, adaptive cruise control, park assist, and he can use his apps through his dashboard display. You win.
The Volkswagen Caddy. Upgrade your workplace. Now with up to £1,250 off when you test drive and buy a new Caddy before the end of June. Our dedicated experts are always on hand to help find the right van for your business. Search Caddy to find out more. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles. Working with you. Participating van centres only. Offer applies to retail and small business customers purchasing 1 to 5 eligible vehicles ordered by 30th of June and registered by 30th of September 2017. Subject to availability. T's and C's and exclusions apply.
Unlimited BT Infinity is broadband like no other. Because you'll get the UK's most powerful Wi-Fi signal versus major broadband providers. That's on top of super fast speeds of up to 52 megabits. And when you're out and about, you'll get free access to over 5 million Wi-Fi hotspots. Oh, we'll also give you a welcome discount of over 25%. Unlimited BT Infinity. Broadband like no other. Visit bt.com/connect.
New customers, 12-month term. Subject to availability, minimum line speed. Terms apply. Over 25% discount versus existing customer standard price. To verify, see bt.com/smarthub.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Yeah, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 75% of MPs, even higher figure in the Lords, of course, as Craig in Edinburgh reminds us, are pro-Remain. So if you did give them a vote on the final deal, they wouldn't necessarily be representative of the public, which I think unintentionally, Craig, it makes a case for the Liberal Democrat policy of having a referendum on the final deal. God help us all from votes, though, eh? Another general election, the third national poll in 2 years. Scottish, you've probably even got more fatigue. I suspect that you'll see in the Conservative manifesto a commitment to not have another referendum in Scotland in the course of the next Parliament. I suspect you will. It's a way of killing another bird with the same stone for Theresa May. But I'm just drawn today, and we've kept it nice, kept it measured. The analogy with the car, it's not perfect, but this is the bit that leaves me puzzled, and I think it's distilled down all of the confusion and nastiness that I'm going to try and move away from. Everyone else can carry on being nasty, but I just want people to start being nice to each other again. I don't think that you're a racist if you still want to leave the European Union. I don't think you're a saboteur or a traitor if you don't want to leave the European Union. I suspect we've got a lot more in common with each other than we have that sets us apart, but I also acknowledge that as a business model, that's pretty rubbish. rubbish. I don't know why this little radio show still manages to be successful with an essential message of compassion and decency when the rest of the world is making so much money from being vile and divisive. But we'll hang in there for as long as we can. And the way that I think you can make everybody see the story from at least the same perspective is to talk about making a decision blind. That's what the referendum was. It was a blind decision. Here's what you've got. Okay, I can see that. Here's what you might have in the future. Well, okay. Who am I going to believe? People who are telling me it's going to be great, or the people who are telling me it's going to be awful? Do you know what? I'm going to believe the people who are telling me it's going to be great. And now we come closer to some of the detail. We come closer to clarity on just how great or not great it's going to be. And the idea that you should have the right to review your opinion is apparently treacherous, treasonous, sabotage. That's the bit I find confusing. And I'm looking actually for... what's the word? Sort of invalidation of that observation. I want you to make it less powerful. D says, what bargaining power would we have if Brussels thought that the people would get another vote before we actually Brexited? I like that. I think I understand your point, and I think it's a good one. But on the other hand, what power do we have as a people if we're not going to have any say at all on the deal? Unless you're suggesting that they might say after they've got the deal, actually, we were kidding, you can have another referendum. Now you know what it is that you're buying or not buying. You can decide whether or not you want to buy it or not. Unless you're suggesting that, then I don't know that it's necessarily a silver lining to say that we can't tell them that we're going to have an actual look at what's on offer. We're going to tell them yes or no before we know what's on offer, which is what we've done, isn't it? This is a penny drop moment. We've said yes or no. We've said buy or sell, buy or not buy, before we know what it is. Which is why it was so important to demonise what we had, to turn the European Union into a rusty old charabanc with the wheels falling off. No, actually, the wheels didn't fall off. That was an assassination attempt. A rusty old charabanc where the wheels fell off. That's what it was. Of course it was. Oh, man. It's taken nearly a year for that penny to drop. So you talk about bendy bananas and you talk nonsense about border control and pretend you don't know that actually the European Union gives you plenty of powers to stop people coming into the country if they don't have a sufficient amount of savings or a job arranged or a 3-month limit on how long they can look for work. You talk about getting our country back and passports and sovereignty and all this sort of nonsense. You make the European Union look rubbish, and then it doesn't matter what you're selling them. Look, it's shiny. It's not even shiny. It's not that. It's not got bendy bananas in the boot. It's going to have better bananas and blue passports. Buy it. And now I feel embarrassed because that almost portrays the 17 million people who voted to leave as being credulous or foolish or both. And I know that they're not. I'm related to some of them. I love some of them. Some of my closest friends are Leave voters. They really are. I know that's usually a line you reserve for when you're trying to describe yourself as not being racist because you've got black friends. But that was the point, wasn't it? Is the European Union was portrayed in such a negative way that it didn't really matter what the alternative was. It was bound to be better than that. And I see some sort of validity in that position. But when you actually have the freedom to compare the two, when you've got the two packages, cars, projects right in front, look, that's what you've got, that's what you're going to get. That's when you make the decision. David's in Frinton. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to just say everything you said in the last 2 minutes, I totally agree with.
Oh dear,
I'm on the same side.
Oh, you've obviously been vetted. Oh, good. There's a butt coming. I like big butts.
But this shiny nonsense. Can we look at something different, please?
All right, I'll park the car. I'm parking the car, David.
This is a general election.
Yes.
Okay. A year ago, the vote. I like something well informed.
Yeah, of course.
I didn't feel that whether it's in or out the European market had a major impact on my family.
Right.
Really. It had some impact, but not major.
Yeah.
What impacts on me is the quality of education I get at state school, what happens when I get ill, the quality of my environment, my rights at work,
yes,
etc. The Conservatives will get in with a big majority.
Yes.
And their shiny will be shiny. They want to see the Daily Mail, everyone point towards it. And James, yours get with everybody else. Your point is towards shiny. But underneath that shiny, look what's in the back seat. Look what's in the boot. All the policies that are scary. And they do frighten me.
Go on.
Because I don't really care if we're in Europe or not.
Sure.
I voted Remain, obviously, because the people who were voting for Leave were less like me than the people voting for Remain. That's the only reason.
Yeah, I get
wouldn't want to. But I think you and you're one of these people to try and move the debate away from the shininess and looking at what's in the boat.
Mate, it's the second. It's day. I'm going to do a Big Brother voice. It's Dear 2. All right, and you're right, and we should. But it is a debate essentially about Brexit. You're right. When we've seen the manifestos, David, I promise, I'll put you through first. We'll start picking apart the manifestos when we've got the detail in front of us. But I mean, I'll take a degree of criticism, but not quite as much as you're offering up, because there's nothing to actually analyse yet.
I have a but, though.
How big is it?
You said it a lot. No one cares about the manifestos. No one cares about the facts anymore. It's all that gut feeling.
Yeah, that's true.
The Vox box we had yesterday about the election, there's nothing about, I want this. It's all about, I want Brexit because we've got to get out of Europe. There's no, or I want to start. It's not. The debate will be framed by, say, Paul Dacre, The Sun, all people like that will frame the debate.
Yeah.
And that's why the only way you're going to get the Tories out is for everybody to be sensible and join hands and have an anti-Tory vote. It won't happen. We know it won't happen. It's too sensible. Because in Europe, they have elections and they have coalitions. They know they can't get full power. They know when they get the largest party will not get a form of government. They've got to work with each other. Over here, it's different. We need to. It's the first past the post. We'll have all control. So why surely can't get a coalition before the ballot? So the Greens, the Lib Dems, Labour get together and say, okay,
SNP as well.
SNP, it makes sense. Let's have the coalition before the election, because we can't. We've got a choice of Tories or nothing.
It's not going to happen, is it?
No, because it's too sensible.
it's too sensible. Silver lining, sterling's hit a 6-month peak. There you go. Cheer up, because, Ramona.
No, the reason it's 6-month peak because all our goods are in dollars.
Yeah, no.
So it makes sense for everyone, for us sterling to suffer, because all the FTSE 100 is, well, I'm an ex-City boy. All the FTSE 100 is all foreign companies. Okay,
large proportion of foreign companies. You're right. I'm just going to rain on your parade. I know you've already predicted this. You've said it was too sensible. Caroline Lucas has called already for a progressive alliance. The Labour Party, remarkably, have issued quite a quick response to that. Would you like to hear it?
I know it says anyway. You don't got to tell me. It's always what he's going to say.
Right, I've got to come off it. I'm building a bit of tension. Play the game, will you? This is theatre, mate. This is theatre of the mind on the radio. Would you like to hear it, David?
If it's not what I think it is, I'll be voting UKIP.
It's box fresh. It's box fresh, this. The ink is still wet. There's only one alternative government, and that's Labour. The only way to get the change we need to build a fair economy and strong public services is to vote Labour. People don't want backroom deals, David. They want to vote for a party they've got confidence in. It didn't say David in the actual statement.
Yeah, just look in the corner, start shouting at that wall. He won't shout back at you.
It's 11:58. David in Princeton, thank you very much indeed. I'm minded, and it's up to you, of course, to see what happens at PMQ's Live this week. I think it could be the last one before the general election, could it? I always forget slightly on the timetables. I think there's a possibility it could be the last one before the general election, but it's certainly the only one happening today, and it's the only one that's happening since, or the first one to happen since Theresa May called an election yesterday. So we'll probably cross live to Parliament after the very latest news headlines. After that, there's room for many more of your calls. It's been a nice show today. And I'm grateful to you for that. There's still an hour to go before Sheila takes over. But I think we've got to, or at least I have to, as the presenter of this programme that we make together every day, I have to try and find a slightly new tone and a slightly new vocabulary, because there's no point just biting chunks out of each other anymore, is there? There's no point doing it. So you, by all means, if you're in the box of trolls, you carry on spitting vile abuse and bile at everybody who has the audacity to exercise their brain before exercising their mouth. But the rest of us, whether you vote Leave or Remain or Labour or Conservative or Liberal Democrat or Green or Scott Nat's got more and more people tuning in up in Scotland, unless you are a sort of chomping bigot, then you want your life to improve and you want my life to improve. We want each other's lives to improve. We want our futures to be better than our pasts. We want our children to have better lives than our parents. Of course we do. That's progress. And now the time has come to start asking how you best achieve that. And this will probably last about 3 minutes, but a decent bit of politeness is a start. Theresa May is on her feet in the House of Commons, a more full House of Commons for PMQs than we've seen in recent weeks. Let's have a listen. Let's see what's unfolding there now.
Meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to join the Prime Minister in offering the condolences of the people of South Leicestershire and myself to the individuals and their families. Mr. Speaker, strong countries need strong economies. Strong countries need strong defences. Strong countries need strong leaders. As the nation prepares to go to the polls, apart from my right honourable friend, who else in this House can provide the leadership that is needed at this time?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There are three things that a country needs: a strong economy, strong defence and strong, stable leadership. That's what our plans for Brexit and our plans for a stronger Britain will deliver. And that's what the Conservative Party will be offering at this election. And we will be out there fighting for every vote. Whereas the right honourable gentleman opposite would bankrupt our economy, weaken our defences and is simply not fit to lead.
Jeremy Corbyn! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I concur with the condolences the Prime Minister just sent to the families of those three people who so sadly and needlessly died, and it's important we recognise that as a cross-party proposal today. And I thank the Prime Minister for that. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the general election, but this is a Prime Minister who promised there wouldn't be one. A Prime Minister who cannot be trusted. She says it's about leadership, yet is refusing to defend her record in television debates. And it's not hard to see why. The Prime Minister says we have a stronger economy. Yet she can't explain why people's wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago, or why more households are in debt, 6 million people earning less than the living wage, child poverty is up, pensioner poverty is up. So why are so many people getting poorer?
I can assure the right honourable gentleman. First of all, I would point out to the right honourable gentleman that I have been answering his questions and debating these matters every Wednesday that Parliament has been sitting since I became Prime Minister. And I will be taking out to the country in this campaign a proud record of a Conservative government. A stronger economy, an economy with a deficit nearly 2/3 down, with 30 million people with a tax cut, 4 million people taken out of income tax altogether, record levels of employment, and £1,250 more a year for pensioners. That's a record we can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, if she's so proud of a record, why won't she debate it? Wages are falling. More children are in poverty. And the last Tory manifesto, page 28, said, we will work to eliminate child poverty. They only eliminated the child poverty targets, not child poverty. In 2010, they promised to eradicate the deficit by 2015. In 2015, they promised to eradicate the deficit by 2020. Austerity has failed. So does the Prime Minister know which year the deficit will now be eradicated?
The right honourable gentleman, I know it's taken the right honourable gentleman a little time to get the hang of these Prime Minister's questions, but I have to say to him that week in and week out, he stands up and asks me questions, and I respond to those questions. And what with a stronger...
Order! The leader of the opposition must be heard, and the Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
A stronger economy with the deficit 2/3 down, but people will have a real choice at this election. They will have a choice between a Conservative government that has shown we can build a stronger economy and a Labour Party whose economic policy would bankrupt this country. And what voters know is that under Labour, it's ordinary working people who pay the price of the Labour Party. They pay it with their taxes, they pay it with their jobs, and they pay it with their children's futures.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Only this year, the new Chancellor pledged to eradicate the deficit by 2022. I do admire Tory consistency. It's always 5 years in the future. Another Tory broken promise. The Prime Minister leads a government that's increased national debt by £700 billion, more than every other Labour government in history put together. Debt has risen every year they've been in office. We know their economic plan was long-term. Does the Prime Minister want to tell us how far into the long term it will be before we get the debt falling?
The right honourable gentleman stands up and talks about a debt. This is a Labour Party that will be going into the election pledged to borrow an extra £500 billion. And what does that mean for ordinary working people? Well, I'll tell the right honourable gentleman what it means. We know what Labour's plans would entail because we've been told by the former Labour Shadow Chancellor. He said the following: if Labour were in power, you'd have to double income tax, you'd have to double national insurance, you'd have to double council tax, and you'd have to double VAT as well. That's Labour's plan for the economy.
Jeremy Corbyn!
All her government has delivered, Mr. Speaker, is more debt and less funding for schools and hospitals. Schools funding being cut for the first time in a generation. The Prime Minister is cutting £3 billion a year from school budgets by 2020. She says they've created a stronger economy. So why are there tax giveaways to the richest corporations while our children's schools are starved of the resources they need to educate our children for the future?
He talks about levels of funding into schools and the NHS. There are record levels of funding going into schools and record levels of funding going into the NHS. But let's just talk about schools, because it's not just a question of funding, it's actually a question of the quality of education provided in the schools. 1.8 million more children are in good or outstanding schools under this Conservative government. That's 1.8 million more children with a better chance for their futures. What would Labour give us? The same old one-size-fits-all local authority-run schools. No choice, good or bad, trust your luck. We don't trust to luck, and we won't trust the Labour Party. We'll provide a good school place for every child.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Parents taking their children back to school for the summer term, many will receive a letter from the school begging for funds to buy books and fund the school. The Conservative manifesto promised the amount of money following your child into school will be protected. It isn't. It's another Tory broken promise. For the first time in its history, Mr. Speaker, NHS funding per pupil, per patient will fall this year. The NHS has been put into an all-year-round crisis by this government. Why are more people waiting in pain and millions of elderly people not getting the care and the dignity that they deserve?
I'm proud proud of the record we have on the NHS. We see more doctors, more nurses, more midwives, more GPs, more people being treated in our National Health Service last year than ever before, and record levels of funding going into our National Health Service. You only can do that with a strong economy. What do we know we'd get from the Labour Party? Bankruptcy and chaos.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, that's a very good reason why we should have a debate about it. Because that is another Tory broken promise. A broken promise of the Tory manifesto, which said they will continue to spend more on the NHS in real terms. Say that to those waiting at A&E departments. Say that to those that can't leave hospital because social care is not available. Mr. Speaker, isn't the truth that over the last 7 years, the Tories have broken every promise on living standards, the deficit, debt, the National Health Service and schools funding? Why should anyone believe a word they say over the next 7 weeks?
I can assure the right honourable gentleman that I will be out campaigning and taking to voters the message of the record of this Conservative government, but crucially of our plans to make Brexit a success and to build a stronger Britain for the future. And every vote for the Conservatives will make it harder for those who want to stop me from getting the job done. Every vote for the Conservatives will make me stronger when I negotiate for Britain with the European Union. And every vote for the Conservatives will mean we can stick to our plan for a stronger Britain and take the right long-term decisions for a more secure future for this country.
Michelle Donovan!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For years I've been campaigning for fairer funding in Wiltshire schools. Will the Prime Minister please reaffirm her commitment to this and to a review of pupil premium to encompass other forms of key disadvantagement, such as being a young carer, mental health problems and bereavement? This way we
Michelle Donovan there, the Conservative MP for Chippenham, just drawing a line under the toing and froing, I felt, between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. Do you know that at 2 minutes to 12, I'd completely forgotten what we were doing after the news. And when I started talking to you about how this might be a good time to have a more measured, more respectful, more polite political debate as Brexit looms ever closer, maybe we should be talking more about what we can do together to make the future better than the past. And then you turn on PMQs and you wonder why political debate in this country is so, well, rabble-like and violent. There's your answer, I fear. It's 12:16. Theo Ushwood still listening to PMQ so that you don't have to. We'll see what our other interventions emerge. Clever Money says there's 2 more now, so that would be the anti-penultimate. If you're a fan of invented Latin words, Latin-based words, that would be your anti-penultimate PMQs. And electioneering will begin in earnest, of course, when Parliament is dissolved. Although it's begun in practice already. And I still this vain search for things on which everybody can agree. I think it's probably a good thing to have an election at this point in time. It does actually rescue Theresa May from the questionable status that she labours under at the moment. She is an unelected Prime Minister leading Britain into a course of action that she was supposed to be opposed to and which may yet prove to be the most momentous peacetime move in recent memory. So it's a good idea to have a general election. Jeremy Corbyn, I thought, had a good PMQs. I've just freed up 2 phone lines. Apologies if you're waiting to talk and don't get a call back. But I want a couple of phone lines just for what you thought of PMQs before Theo comes and gives us the allegedly expert view. I thought Corbyn played a blinder there, actually, much to my own surprise. I thought he was... I tell you what it is about angry politicians. It's about sincerity, isn't it? So politicians are always angry or always capable of turning on the anger. But there are 2 questions that voters should ask. What are you angry about? And do I believe that you're angry? And I do think, for all the criticism that he takes, I do think he's sincere when he talks about waiting lists and poverty. Whether or not he's intelligently informed, I don't know. But he does seem to be sincere. And he's got a little play there for the next couple of weeks on the debates. It's quite... I'd have been a little bit more self-deprecating if I was advising him. I'd have actually made a joke about my reputation. So if I was Jeremy Corbyn, I'd have talked about how I haven't even got the support of my own party. I'm a complete joke. Everybody thinks I'm this. Everybody thinks I'm that. People think I can't punch my way out of a wet paper bag. I can't knock the skin off a political rice pudding. I can't even catch a train without ending up in hot water about fibbing regarding the availability of seats. I am utterly, utterly useless. And you are frightened to debate me. That I thought would have been maybe a really winning line. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not advising Jeremy Corbyn at this point in time. Raj is in East Grinstead. Maybe he is. Raj, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Well, I think it's quite sad. I think Jeremy Corbyn did do a very good PMQs there.
He did, didn't he?
I found myself sort of... Sorry?
He did, yeah, I think he did.
Yeah, I actually found myself nodding and, thinking, oh, right, that's quite a good point that he made, even though I would never, ever in hell even consider voting Labour. I mean, I'm only 17 years old, so I can't even vote anyway. But I just think... I think this election raises some quite interesting questions, actually, about if you are a Remainer and you voted to remain, then actually it's looking like there is only one party that you can vote for if you didn't want a hard Brexit, because Theresa May can go on all she likes about how she was a slight Remainer, whatever she was saying, but actually the path the Conservatives are now going in is pretty much the 2015 UKIP manifesto, and I think
you're the second caller to say that, and I understand why. But let me read you what Richard has emailed before you came on, actually, but only 10 minutes ago. What Mrs. May really wants is a softer Brexit, which she is in severe danger of not being able to deliver. That would be, for me to add brackets, because of the paucity of her majority in Parliament. So the rebels, if you will, the hard Brexit rump, the smaller her majority, the more power they wield. He goes on, a very small number of Brexit hardliners could scupper any deal in Parliament. With a bigger majority, she would have far more room to negotiate more reasonably to the benefit of both sides without pressure from the hardliners. Mrs. May is a Remainer at heart, and this way she can deliver what she and we want.
Now, that's a complete different... I mean, that could be true, actually.
Yeah, I think it could.
With a bigger majority, she can definitely play to the more centre-right ground, which she might want to do, which I felt David Cameron was trying to... I felt he was more centre-right than Mr. May.
Yes.
But I think what would be better, I think she's still not going to give a referendum on the final deal.
No.
And something Jeremy Corbyn just said was that I don't trust Theresa May. He said that in PMQs, and I don't really trust Theresa May to be voted in with a large majority and then to take Britain through that period in 5 years and not give us a final say on the deal. And that is why I think, actually, a Liberal Democrat government, I mean, I'm Liberal Democrat majority, that's never going to happen. But you think about sort of Tim Farron, he's saying that he'll give a referendum at the end. And I just think that's much more sensible, because I think the British people...
A referendum on that second deal, I think, as a caller earlier, I may owe half an apology to. So the referendum will be on the terms of the second deal. The manifesto pledge will be to remain in the single market. Do you understand? You're a lot younger than me. You'll be a lot less cynical. In your words, why would anybody not want people to have the freedom to express a view or even to change their minds once they've seen what it is that's on offer, rather than the promises and the threats that were on offer last year?
I think for politicians, it just complicates it, and I think they don't want that. They don't want that. They want to be able to just. They think. I mean, that's a generalisation completely, but I think a lot of them think that actually they've been voted in, they can actually push forward and do what is necessary for the country. But you can't do anything that's necessary for the whole country, because Britain is divided. Britain is split down the middle.
Have you not been listening to the Prime Minister? Britain is coming together, Raj.
I know, and I heard that yesterday morning when you were talking. You said that I can't remember, you had a Conservative MP saying Britain is more united than ever. And I thought that was absolutely insane. I mean, Britain is split. Britain is divided.
It was Nadeem Zahawi who holds the seat for Stratford up on Avon.
I think that was a ludicrous thing to say.
But that's the new Kool-Aid, I think. I think we touched on something yesterday. I think that's becoming the new Brexit means Brexit, because what it means is that if you do what you're doing and say, well, hang on a minute, why can't I see the car before I decide whether I want to buy it, then I portray you as being a source of division. My one prediction for 2017 was that the new chapter of political debate would involve all the people who are trying to cover up their mistakes or pretend that they haven't made a mistake, saying, I know you are, but what am I, to the other side. So all the people who've caused the division are now going to try to accuse all the people who hate the division of being somehow responsible for it. And that's underway, and it's working. I mean, it will work, because the Mail and the Sun will be behind it.
I think what this whole debate needs, in fact, we can argue all the small details, but overall, I think the only way we're going to make a real positive success actually out of Brexit is if all the politicians are honest with each other, and if they stop playing stupid games, and they actually form, after this election, whatever the result is, sort of a cross-party alliance to get the best for the country. And I think that is the only way that we're going to get
I said that you weren't as cynical as me, Raj. I didn't realise you were going to double down on that with a beautiful outbreak of youthful idealism. And don't take
17 years.
Well, don't take this the wrong way, my 17-year-old friend. But Tom's just been in touch to say I'm voting for this child.
I think it may just be idealistic. But I think,
no, it's not. It's not. It's rational. It's rational and sensible. But of course, it is also underpinned by the fear that you're not allowed, being the fear that must not speak its name, which is that this deal that would be the best available deal for the country might not be as good as the deal that we've currently got, which is why you're not really allowed in the current climate to do what Raj has done and suggest that it might be worth all trying to pull together in the same direction, because if you're pulling together towards a direction that is demonstrably inferior to the point that you started from, then the whole debate starts again and all of the viciousness continues. It is coming up to 12:30. Raj, please ring me again when you get the chance, although not at the expense of your studies. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to pick over the carcass of yesterday's announcement that another nationwide poll is on the way. Theo Usherwood's still listening to the debate in the House of Commons. He'll bring us up to date with any developments there at about 12:45. Before that, we've still got a little bit more time to take your calls. I appreciate that some people have been waiting to talk to me for yonks, and that the ship may have sailed, or the focus of the conversation may have moved on. So I've got one phone line free now if you want to refer to what you've heard in the course of the last 20 minutes or so. The PMQs. Raj suggesting Jeremy Corbyn had rather a good outing. A couple of people on Twitter telling me that it was enough to secure their votes. That seems a little premature, but then these are strange times. Matt points out that claims the second referendum issue is all about Theresa May's legacy. If she doesn't have one, then she can spin Brexit whatever transpires as a success. If she does have one, it becomes a potential resignation issue. Do you know, such is the mark of modern British politics, Matt, I don't know whether you're talking about the EU or Scotland. I think it might apply equally to both, so clarify, please. It's 12:30. Where George Osborne, we've just learned, is going to need a new nickname. 5 jobs. 5 jobs, George. He's stepping down from the House of Commons, but adds in the letter of explanation, adds the words "for now." Make of that what you will. I'm stepping down from the House of Commons for now. I wonder if Ed Balls is going to quick step back in. No, don't do those puns, mate. Seriously. I wonder whether Ed Balls is going to step back in, or at least seek re-election to the House of Commons. He's had a bit of a sort of reputation rehabilitation, hasn't he? Not just by doing Strictly Come Dancing, but also by shrugging off the sort of shackles of parliamentary representation, of being able to say in public things that might be a little bit ripe or a little bit fruity, a little bit funny, not living with that constant fear of saying something regrettable, which is, I think, a large part of the reason why so many politicians are so hard to get anything meaningful out of. They're just terrified of embarrassment. They're terrified of having one comment in a 1-hour interview magnified and blown up on the front page. But we'll see whether Ed Balls does that. The Evening Standard remarkably got the scoop on that story. I don't know. Their political team must have been working through the night, burning the candle at both ends to secure the scoop that George Osborne is to stand down as the MP for Tatton. At the age of 45, he says, God, same age as me. I don't want to spend the rest of my life just being an ex-chancellor. I want new challenges. I'm very excited about the opportunity to edit the Evening Standard. I've met the team there, and their energy and commitment to this great newspaper are positively infectious. It's come a long way George Osborne, since being turned down for the graduate traineeship at the Times newspaper shortly after leaving university. It's 12:36. Back to Brexit Britain, back to the general election, back to today's developments. Natalie is in Hammersmith. Natalie, what would you like to say?
Hi, sorry, I was just laughing at the George Osborne bit.
Bless him.
I was feeling incredibly sorry for him this morning because I thought it was very selfish of him to, call an election when he's got a new job to get into.
How can you do this? I've got to get a paper out tomorrow, and now I've got to go and bang on doors in Cheshire. You're very generous. How charitable of you, Natalie.
All the researchers at the Evening Standard were wondering why they were focusing on tax and polling numbers. They were like, "This is in London." Sorry.
That's quite all right. We are where we are.
Yeah, no, I didn't realise we were at war because I think that's sort of where we're at now because any kind of dissent, any kind of debate about what Brexit is going to be is suddenly anti-British and it's as if we're colluding with the enemy. So, and you mentioned this is a peacetime issue, but I almost feel like the papers and Theresa May, they're acting as if it's a war. I mean, she said it yesterday and she said it again during PMQs that every vote for the Conservatives will strengthen our hand in negotiations.
Yes.
So in the other side of that is if we vote for anyone else, we're going to weaken the country and help.
Yes, and I'm seeing reflections of that rhetoric in my inbox. I hadn't worked out its source, but you're right, I think, to pick that explanation. How does it weaken our hand in negotiations if we say that we want to be sure it's a good deal?
Well, exactly. I mean, for me, I just think that she hasn't been held to any kind of strong or hard scrutiny as it is. I do think that Corbyn did well. I mean, but we are judging on a curve here. So, compared to previous performances, it was a good performance. But I think that, we would all say that when you have someone who's snapping at your heels, you don't get complacent and you push yourself. You have to have someone who's holding you to account so that you do get the best deal. Whereas I think that if you just sort of coast along, well, you've got no one challenging you, so you've got nothing pushing you, if you see what I mean.
Well, this is the question. Who is the opposition now in Britain in this sort of post-referendum landscape, and now it will be post-general election? What is the opposition? Where is the opposition? What is it? I don't know. I actually don't know.
I think the only answer is the House of Lords, and it's something which she took aim at yesterday, didn't she? Yes, yeah, exactly. But I think the fact that they are unelected actually works in their favour because they're not thinking short term, they're thinking long term about the country. And I think that the idea that she also mentioned that if we were to give the deal to the British people for a referendum, as Tim Farron has suggested doing, that would be ridiculous. Europe does that all the time.
Yes, it does, you're right.
They're always having referendums on what they've decided with Europe. Do you agree with this? And then the people say no, and then they go back and they negotiate again. It's how things are done. So to say that it weakens them, again, we're back into this sort of wartime mentality where she's got a war cabinet.
There is something in this, a bunker mentality. Do you know what I was reading yesterday about the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, which Lloyd George was negotiating, I think. And guess which newspaper ran a campaign called Make Prussia Pay?
I'm going to go with the Daily Mail.
It's amazing, isn't it? And Make Prussia Pay, of course, some people would argue that the punitive nature of the reparations that Germany were forced to pay after the First World War is what caused the Second World War.
Yeah, completely. Well, if the economy hadn't been crashed so much, which is why when it came to the end of the Second World War, they thought, hang about, maybe we should help them rebuild their economy and they won't turn to fascism again. There's logic in it.
Some people are only happy when they've got their tin hats on, when they feel that there is a kind... And, of course, then you have to sort of invent an enemy, which is why the European Union has ended up being portrayed in such a negative term, despite the fact that, look, rightly or wrongly, or successfully or unsuccessfully, that it's an institution that's dedicated to the improvement of the lives of people in all member countries. It might get stuff wrong, but somehow they've managed to portray it as an organisation that's dedicated to the detriment of the lives of people in Britain. I still don't quite know how they've pulled that off, but by invoking the rhetoric of war, these sort of missions become a lot easier, don't they?
Yeah, and I think when you've got people like Michael Caine saying, I'd rather be a poor master than a rich servant, I mean, there's no logic in that statement.
No, although we do owe Michael Caine a great debt for the finest Brexit analogy of all, which is of course a coach teetering on the end of a cliff edge, waiting to plummet into the abyss forever, albeit one loaded with gold bullion. Interesting intervention. Natalie, I'm going to crack on because I've got so many people to speak to. Thank you so much for your call. Richard is in Acton. Richard, what's going on there?
Well, first of all, on George Osborne, very quickly, if he's resigning as an MP, does that mean the unemployment figures are going to change?
No, it's still got 5 jobs. He's not going to be joining the dole queue anytime soon.
Just have to call him multi. Jeremy Corbyn and Angus Robertson, and everything Jeremy Corbyn says may have been true.
Yes.
Okay? Poverty, pensions, the NHS, everything. But he came over to me, and this is purely personal.
Yes, of course.
He came over as whining, whinging, and when the Prime Minister came back and says, I can assure you I'm going out to talk to the people, she sounded on the attack. But Angus Robertson comes in with his first question. Does the Prime Minister think that people who are...
I think I've got it. I think I've got... Have I got... No, I haven't got it. Sorry, you carry on. You carry on, Richard.
And she went, yeah, right, okay.
This is a reference to the Daily Mail front page. He said, does the Prime Minister think that people who, oppose Brexit or...
Yeah, it was about saboteurs.
Are saboteurs. And she won't answer that question. She won't do anything. The one thing every single person can say with certainty about Theresa May, she will not do anything to upset her already been a dinner guest at Downing Street, Paul Dacre.
And he comes in with his second question. Effectively, I'm paraphrasing a bit.
Of course.
Why won't the Prime Minister debate on television? To which he says, I can assure you I am going out to the people. She sounded defensive.
So when Angus... You know you're very good. I don't know if you're auditioning for Theo Usherwood's job, but I hope he's worried.
I'm also an enemy of the people, by the way.
We're all enemies of the people now. Are you a saboteur who needs to be crushed, Richard?
Oh, absolutely.
Congratulations. Wear that badge with pride. Wear that badge. So what you're pointing out to us is kind of where the show started this morning with the observations about the policies don't matter. It's the person punting the policy that matters the most. And I referred to an American president bombing Syria with Barack Obama had 20% support from Republicans. Donald Trump has 80% support for an identical policy. Ed Miliband's cap on energy prices was a sign of... It was communism when he came up with it. It's genius when Theresa May comes up with it. You're saying when Angus Robertson takes a swing at the Prime Minister, he lands a punch, and when Jeremy Corbyn does, even though he's using exactly the same mode of attack, he doesn't land a punch at all.
Jeremy Corbyn's problem is he doesn't... That should have been his first question for the debate. His second question should have been...
I think it was.
Right. Well, yeah, but it came in the form of a speech as well. That's the point. Jeremy Corbyn makes speeches and he rants. He may, as I said to you earlier, he may be correct.
Yes.
It comes over as a rant. His first question should have been like Angus Robertson about, say, the debate. And the second question...
Why won't you do it?
The Prime Minister breaks her promises. Could the Prime Minister tell me why, for example, I'm making this up now, why she has lied about sovereignty? Well, you can't use the word lie in the Commons, I accept that.
No, but you'd give a long list of broken pledges, shall we say.
Just three.
Yeah, but do you know that doesn't work? Can I tell you something weird?
Go on.
When I first started doing this job, the first time I drew blood with a well-known politician was with Boris Johnson, when I asked him whether or not how could voters trust him? It's going back years, before he was Mayor of London, before he refused to talk to me. How can voters trust you if you've been prepared to lie to your party leader, your employer at The Spectator at the time, who he told he wouldn't seek to be an MP while he was editor of The Spectator, and to both of your wives who you've cheated on? And I, in my naive way, I thought that was, a really big deal. Ha-ha! And I think you've just fallen into the same trap. You think that would work. Maybe if someone better than me had done it, or maybe if someone better than Jeremy Corbyn did it, it might work. But generally speaking, you just get a little flurry of embarrassment. And you go, oh, come on, mate, I'm not answering that question. But you don't actually land any proper punches.
But had William Hague been a socialist, and he had asked that, he would have got away with it, because William Hague always got the better of Tony Blair at PMQs.
Yes, he did.
Because William Hague was very good at, he was the exocet who would look at the problem and then shoot straight for the heart of it. Jeremy, as I said to you before, Jeremy Corbyn may be right, but he rants.
It doesn't matter about the message. It's all about the messenger. Yeah, I mean, you're certainly right up to the point that we've reached. Theo Ashwood, LBC's political editor, is with me. That pause was for dramatic effect. I didn't forget my own name. You've been following on from the PMQs that we took live. Let's begin with the bit that everybody heard. Oh, actually, you begin wherever you want to begin, Theo.
Can I begin with Angus Robertson?
You can begin with Angus Robertson, yes.
The SNP in Westminster, and he brought up the front page of the Daily Mail today, which ran the headline, "Crushed the Saboteurs," taken, some might say, directly from Theresa May's speech on the steps of number 10 Downing Street yesterday, as she laid out her plans to hold a general election and therefore silence the naysayers. Mr. Robertson had this to say.
Speaker, it's disappointing the Prime Minister didn't take the opportunity to condemn intemperate language in describing other democratic politicians as well. There's heckling from the other side, and I think the Prime Minister should take the opportunity to underline something that we should all agree on, that describing people in the way that we've read in some daily newspapers by leading politicians is not acceptable.
That was Angus Robertson.
A reference to crush the saboteurs.
Absolutely. And then the Prime Minister came back and defended the Daily Mail.
One of the crucial things we have in this country that underpins our democracy is a free press. And I believe that is important, and I believe people in this chamber should stand up for the freedom of the press. And as to the TV debates, I can assure the right honourable gentleman that I will be out there campaigning in every part of the United Kingdom, taking out there our proud record of a Conservative government that has delivered for every part of the United Kingdom.
So she won't, will she, ever do anything that might possibly upset the Daily Mail?
It wouldn't be, as she sets out her plan, it would divert from her narrative.
It's not helpful to call these decent, honest British people saboteurs. They are just people, sincere, decent people with misgivings that it is my job to address, but she can't do that.
There's a lot of, perhaps some surprise as to the tactics that Theresa May has taken when it comes to facing down her opponents. But perhaps I don't think we should be surprised, because whilst...
What is her job? To shut them up?
Whilst Home Secretary, she has always taken always took a confrontational approach. Michael Gove, when he was Secretary of State for Education, found out to his cost. Nick Clegg was, as Deputy Prime Minister, was attacked when he questioned new privacy laws. And so perhaps this isn't a diversion, it's a mere continuation of her modus operandi, is to go after people that disagree with her. Moving on to Jeremy Corbyn, you heard from him earlier, and there is, of course, a debate amongst Labour moderates about how to handle the party's current situation. Some have decided to stand down. The current tally is running into, well, it's more than 5 now. Andrew Smith has just stood down, and I should add that George Osborne has decided that he's not going to continue as an MP to become Evening Standard editor. But the issue for Labour MPs is, do they stand down or do they fight? And if they fight, how do they manage the Labour message? Now, Jenny Chapman, former Shadow Minister, asked a question about the NHS, Labour former Shadow Minister, and then she got this reply, stinging reply, from the Prime Minister.
But I'm interested. The Honourable Lady refers to the views of her constituents in Darlington. She has said, of the leader of the opposition, the leader of her party, my constituents in Darlington have made it clear to me they cannot support the Labour Party under your leadership. How can they possibly support him as leader of the country?
Which leads very neatly into Sheila Fogarty's opening salvo, coming up in about 7 minutes' time, of course, which is what would happen if the Labour Party did somehow manage to coalesce behind Jeremy Corbyn, because it's a mother of all Achilles' heels, isn't it, for people like Theresa May to aim for?
It's not necessarily impossible that Jeremy Corbyn could form some sort of rainbow coalition with the SNP
above the streets and houses
and Liberal Democrats, but it is Theresa May, as she set out on the steps of Downing Street yesterday, she's not even regarding it as a possibility when she talks about Jeremy Corbyn at the helm of a coalition. She wants that's where she's pitching her attack. It's not that Jeremy Corbyn could become Prime Minister of a Labour majority government. That's not simply
some form of Lib Lab pact with a bit of SNP thrown in. And you don't. I mean, Linton Crosby's back on the team, isn't he? And you can remember how they toxified us, well, Scottish people, because that was apparently going to be a fate worse than death.
But what's interesting this time round is they're not toxifying Scottish, the SNP, and that might give some indication as to how far Nicola Sturgeon has taken the party, especially here in the minds of English voters. The strategy is to go after Jeremy Corbyn and to go after the Labour Party, and that might seem obvious, but it's worth pointing out. The other issue that came up at PMQs repeatedly today was that of education. Now, in 2015, James, this was a dead rubber. It was never an issue to be discussed because it was all very technical, and Ed Miliband and David Cameron, broadly speaking, had the same policy to freeze spending. This time, of course, Theresa May wants to expand grammar schools, rejig the school's funding formula, which in effect will mean that some schools, particularly in rural constituencies, could lose as much as double digits when it comes to their school's funding budget. And Theresa May received this rather stinging question from her own side, from a Conservative MP called Maria Caulfield.
Maria Caulfield!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the fact that because the Conservatives have managed the economy so well, there's record funding on school funding this year. In East Sussex, for example, has some of the best performing schools in the country. They're set to receive an increase of 3%. However, in Lewis and my constituency, many of my small rural primary schools are set to see a reduction. So could the Prime Minister guarantee she will look at the issue of rural primary school funding so that we can even out the fairer distribution of money?
The second part of that question, I should add, is the most important, because many Conservative backbenchers are very unhappy about the way the funding formula is going. Tim Farron, he also made a very brief appearance. He seems to have rather irked the Speaker, John Bercow. He was put to the very back of the queue. Sometimes he doesn't even feature at all. But he had this to say about the decision to call an early election.
The British public deserve to hear the party leaders set out their plans and debate them publicly. But the Prime Minister has refused to take part in televised leaders' debates. The Prime Minister and I, back in 1992, debated publicly, forcibly and amicably when we were both candidates together. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister called out the then incumbent who did not show up for some of those debates. Why will she not debate those issues publicly now?
That's a nice point. A little bit glance in the rearview mirror, but of course the debate only became a thing in 2010, didn't they? So this idea that they're a long-standing tradition. They became an issue under Tony Blair, and the reason I raised that because they've of course first featured James in 2010, but of course Blair was under pressure to hold debates, televised debates, as far back as 2001. The issue for Tony Blair, of course, was that he didn't need to do it because he was so far ahead. And nor does Theresa May, and that's why they're not happening. Will the broadcasters dare to empty chair her? I suspect not. Sean's got a question for you, Theo.
Go on.
He says, in this rainbow coalition that you just spoke of, which one would be bungle?
I can decline to answer.
It's coming up to 1 o'clock. That's it from me for another day.